Welcome to the How to Animate in After Effects course. My name is Dave Boutque for Envato, and in this course, you will learn how to put together several useful text animations using a variety of techniques. The main part of this course focuses on 3 animations based on work created by a designer. A burger logo treatment using a great-looking font and burger art that has a chalkboard sketch look, an outer space / heads-up display logo treatment that uses some really simple animations and a bit of flash to make a great-looking animation, and a Boutque-style logo treatment that uses a write-on effect and a bunch of leaf elements that has a really organic movement to it. All of the assets in this course, such as fonts, graphics, and backgrounds, came from Envato Elements. And the great thing is, with a subscription, I can try them all. Envato Elements is perfect for video creators and producers with unlimited downloads of video templates, stock footage, fonts, music, sound effects, and so much more. Before you dive into those great-looking design animations, you'll start by learning about keyframe animation. Then you will learn how to reveal text with masks and shape layers. From there, the rest of the course teaches you very practical examples, putting together great-looking animations with text, including those 3 animations that have art created by a graphic designer using assets from Envato Elements. In those lessons, you will learn how to prep the art for use in After Effects and then animate all of the elements. These lessons will use a combination of keyframe animation, text reveals, and After Effects expressions to create some complex and subtle movement. You will also learn about some third-party effects and scripts to help you with animating. None of those third-party effects and scripts are required, but it's good to know that there are tools out there to help you with really tedious animations when you need them. This course assumes that you have some basic After Effects knowledge. Perhaps you've already watched the After Effects for Beginners course. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to explain everything that I'm doing so that you can follow along. But I am going to move pretty quickly. Now, don't let this deter you. Most of the lessons are right around 10 minutes in length, so you can watch the lesson to get an idea of where it's going, and then go back to the beginning and follow along, and pause the video wherever you need to catch up. At the end of the course, you will have learned how to create several great-looking animations. Even better, you will have learned the techniques that are used to put them together, and you can use that knowledge along with your own creativity for countless animations. To get started, check out the next lesson, where you will learn about Keyframe Basics.
Hey video creators! With Envato Elements, you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial licenses for one low cost. Because no matter which video you're creating, Envato Elements has everything you need. Get creative with unlimited downloads of royalty-free stock footage, video templates, audio, and millions of other creative assets.
Whoa. All right, people, let's move on. So this is where Mike stands, and this is where the dinosaur comes in.
Yeah, Envato Elements is where you find and download everything. Motion graphics, dinosaurs, and create even more with social media assets, online content, everything.
Everything. Literally everything.
Music tracks, sound effects. Thank you. Everything you need for your videos, it's all unlimited. Deliver better videos faster with Envato Elements. Get started today.
In this lesson, you are going to learn about keyframe animation. Now, keyframe animation in After Effects is the primary way that you do animations of anything. Doesn't matter if you're animating text, animating puppets, animating properties in an effect on a video, or masks or shapes. Most of that stuff is done, I would say 98% of the time, is done with keyframes. Now, if you've watched the After Effects for Beginners course, you will have already learned a little bit about keyframe animation. But for those of you who have not, this is just going to be a quick overview. So the best way, I think, to show you how keyframe animation works is just to show you. So if you've got this composition open, go ahead and follow along. Let's say, for example, I want to animate the position of my text layer here. Now, you'll notice that this is not a text layer. It's actually a pre-comp. And that's because I have inside this pre-comp a text layer and then a paper texture, and the text is actually acting as a track map. More on that later. So if I want to animate the position, I need to bring up the position property, and I can do that by pressing P on the keyboard. And then if I click this stopwatch right here, this will toggle the ability of this property to change over time. And when I did that, you can see in the timeline here, it inserted this diamond-shaped keyframe. And what that keyframe is doing, if we double click on it, is it's recording the position of my layer. Now, if I scrub or play my composition here, nothing is going to happen. And that's because we need another keyframe for some animation to get moving here. So if I go back to the beginning of my comp and I take my layer and I just drag it down, and while I'm dragging it down, I'm just going to hold Shift, and that'll constrain the movement here to the vertical axis only so I can get a nice straight up and down move. Or you can just come over here to the position property and just click and drag in the Y. So this is X, which is the horizontal, and this is Y, which is up and down. It's vertical movement here. You can see that as soon as you change the position, After Effects inserted another keyframe, which is right here. And so between these two keyframes, we get animation. We have one position keyframe here, which is recording this value. And then we have another position keyframe, which is recording a different value. Now, in the X property of the position, it's not changing, but it is changing. And you can see that right over here. It is changing the Y value of the position over time. And so this is what our keyframe animation looks like. If we want to go down the timeline further, let's say we want to go to maybe 3 seconds, and we want at 3 seconds to maybe 4 seconds, we want to move this again. What I'm going to do is come right over here, and I'm going to add a keyframe at the current time. And then I'm going to go to 4 seconds, and I might just push this off to the right. And I did that by holding Shift again right after I clicked on my layer to constrain that to just to move it in the horizontal. And now my animation looks like this. Text comes up, it holds for 2 seconds, and then it flies off to the right. And in fact, I'll just trim my composition here to make that a little shorter. There we go. Very cool. Now, these types of keyframes, you can see the diamond shape here. These are linear keyframes. Linear keyframes apply a uniform sort of interpolation to the movement, meaning that it all kind of moves at the same speed. And a really easy way to see exactly what's happening is if we jump into the graph editor, and you can do that by clicking on this button right here. And if you select the position, if it wasn't already selected, that'll bring up this graph here, which right now is representing the speed. Now, if yours looks like this, that's because you have it set to the value graph. So go ahead and click over to the speed graph, because I think for a lot of things, this is more useful, especially when we're talking about the speed of the animation. And you can see that these linear keyframes, they don't do any kind of acceleration or deceleration. So this graph is representing pixels per second. And at the start of the animation, we're zooming right along here at 696.3 pixels per second. And it continues at that speed until this frame right here at 1 second, where it goes to 0 instantly. And then right down here at just before 3 seconds, we go from 0 pixels per second and we fly right up to 1521.7 pixels per second. And then it flies off the screen. These types of linear keyframes or linear interpolation work for a lot of things, but it may not be the smoothest. And we can make this a lot smoother by selecting our keyframes, and you can just draw a rectangular marquee around the keyframes to select them. And you can see they turn blue when they're selected, or you can just click on the position property over here, and that will select all of your position keyframes. And then if you right click on one of your keyframes, you can go to Keyframe Assistant, and it's just off screen here. Let me drag that up. Keyframe Assistant, and we can choose something like Easy Ease. And you'll see the shape of the keyframes now changes to an hourglass. And if we play the animation, you're going to hopefully see that this is a little bit smoother. Now, it is subtle, but the speed is no longer remaining at a constant. And if we look at the graph editor again, check this out. Now our animation starts with a speed of 0, slowly accelerates until right in the middle of the animation, and then starts to decelerate again. So we're getting a much smoother kind of curve here, and it does look visually smoother when you're actually seeing what's happening on screen. Now with the graph editor, you can actually modify this curve by selecting one of the keyframes and then pulling out this handle here to make a smoother curve at the end part of the animation or the beginning of the animation. And check out what this looks like. Oh, it's got a totally different look. I mean, it's essentially moving from the same two spots. We didn't change the position and we didn't change the timing of the animation. It's still starting at 0 and ending at 1 second, but it looks different. It looks kind of smoother, maybe a little bit more realistic. And you can modify this even further, like that. And then we can do the same thing to the outgoing animation here. We can make a very drastic curve like that, or we can reverse this, pull that in tight, and pull this second handle all the way out, and have it look like it's being kind of shot into some viscous liquid or something like that. This kind of process of creating the keyframes and then modifying the interpolation between the two keyframes is a lot of what keyframe animation is all about. One part of it is, what do you want the thing to do, which is move from point A to B and then from B to C. And then it's, how do you want it to look? And the look part has a lot to do with how it moves. And the big thing that determines how it moves is the speed at which it starts moving and stops moving. And you can adjust that in a number of ways. One of those is with the graph editor here. And like I said, we can create all kinds of different interesting variations on this curve here to make it come in like that and fly out like that. Lots of different options. And there are other ways to modify that without clicking and dragging the handles. You can also double click on one of these keyframes and you can modify the incoming velocity's influence. That's pretty tedious. And then there are some third-party tools, which I'm going to show you in an upcoming lesson, to do a very similar thing to working in the graph editor, but it makes it a lot more consistent and a lot easier, especially when you're working on multiple properties. So let me show you one thing here, because I want to kind of expand this idea. I'm just going to modify this by pulling up the position of this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, and with no layer selected, I'm just going to drag a little square here by holding Shift as I click and drag. Then I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Home. That's going to put the anchor point right in the center of my shape layer here. And then Control-Home will center this up. I'm going to grab the selection tool, then reselect my layer and just pull this down to about here, maybe scale that down a little bit, and finally change the color to something really gross like green. Actually, I think that looks pretty cool. What I want to show you here is the idea of animating multiple layers and multiple keyframes. So what I'm going to animate with this layer is the position by pressing P, and then if I hold Shift and R, I can also bring up the rotation right here. Now you can get to all of the transform controls by just clicking down this little twirl down arrow here, and then under transform, you can get to all of them. But if you know which properties you want to work with, you can just bring them up with their keyboard shortcuts. So P for position, and then Shift R will also add the rotation. And I can just click and drag and pull down to enable animation and insert this keyframe here. And then I'll go down here and I will pull down this square to about here and then change the rotation to, I don't know, 180. So let's check out, if I just play it right now, let's look at what's happening here. Okay, so I have an animation with two different layers across multiple properties. And even though they're starting and ending at the same time, you can see these keyframes are all on 1 second. It doesn't look like it's starting and ending at the same time. It looks different, like somehow the Animate is getting there faster. And it is. This is one of the things that can be really tricky when you're animating, because a lot of times you're not just animating one property, you're animating multiple properties. So the best way to deal with this is to kind of modify the speed of all of these properties at the same time. So because these are kind of a Bezier shape here with this hourglass, and they've been easy eased, and then I've messed with the curves here, and these are linear, if I just select all of these and then press F9, they'll instantly all be set back to easy ease. You can see that the curves all have about the same shape. They don't all have the same amplitude if you're thinking about this shape kind of as a wave, but they do have the same kind of incoming and outgoing influence here. And if I play this, you'll see that now the animations look like they start and they stop at the same time. And if I wanted to modify these by giving them a little bit more of that kind of curvy look to them, what I would do is select all of these keyframes right down here, make a little bit more room here so you can kind of see what's going on. Right, so I'd click and drag, make a rectangular marquee and select all of these, and then maybe pull out this handle here. And now what you'll see is I get that nice curve where they kind of slide into position a little bit slower, or it kind of decelerates a lot faster, kind of like that. But the animations, both of these two layers and the multiple properties, they all look like they're moving at the same speed. Now, sometimes you want this and sometimes you don't. So you may just select maybe one of these properties and make a different curve or something like this. Maybe you want that to look, I don't know, like this. And you're doing it intentionally, and that's totally fine. But when you want to get things to move at the same time, if I select all three of these properties and go into the graph editor again, that's going to be kind of a trick now because they're not all going to want to move at the same time. So you can either pull the handle all the way to the left, then reselect it and then move it back, or you can just select all the keyframes here, hit F9 to reset them to easy ease, and then select these and kind of move them from that easy eased point. Now, I know that was a lot to cover, and if it didn't make 100% sense, don't worry. In the next few lessons, you're going to see this same idea used over and over, and so it's really going to make sense when you see it used in real-world applications. So coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at something that you're going to be using throughout the rest of this course, and that is ideas on how to reveal text. In the rest of the course, we're going to be looking at multiple ways to do text animations and do text treatments, and one of those is how do you reveal text. We're doing one in this lesson where it's just kind of flying in from the bottom of the screen, but that doesn't work for every text animation. So coming up in the next lesson, you're going to look at a couple of different ways that you can reveal text. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to do some really simple text reveals, which is going to come in really handy for the rest of your After Effects journey working with text. Now, if I didn't mention it before, all of the assets, including the fonts, have come from Envato Elements. If you didn't know that Envato Elements had fonts, check this out. If you go to Envato Elements and you click on the fonts right here, you'll see tons of great looking fonts. I mean, these are really fantastic looking fonts, and you can sort by serif, sans serif, handwritten, or script, decorative, and you can even sort by different spacing types, normal, monospace, condensed, expanded, and more. This particular font is called Devant Horgen, or maybe it's Devant Horgen. You know, I don't know exactly how it's pronounced. Pronunciation is not one of my skill sets. But you can search it up on Envato Elements. All right, let's talk about some masks and track mats, because really that's primarily, I think, how you're going to be doing a lot of different text reveals in After Effects. This is kind of the bread and butter of doing really basic text animations. If I want to put a mask on this text layer here, I just select my text layer over here, and I can come up to Layer, go down to Mask, and New Mask. I can also use the keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-N. Sometimes what you'll find with masks, depending on the font, is that you'll have maybe a curvy font like an S, a C, an O, or maybe even an R that has a little bit of aliasing or a few pixels that go above basically the top of the text layer, and the mask will actually chop it off a little bit sometimes. It's very subtle, and you have to be really detail-oriented to even notice. This particular font does not do that, but I just want to show you what I do whenever I apply a mask to a text layer is I will double click it, and that brings up these transform handles here. I'll grab the center kind of bottom one here. I'll click and then hold Control and just drag it down a tiny little bit to give myself a little bit of padding on the top and the bottom. And I'll do the same to the right and the left here just a little bit. Now, some of you who know a little bit about masks will say, okay, what you just did there is absurd because you can actually add something called mask expansion right here underneath the mask properties. And yeah, I know you can do that, but I can't see the mask expansion. When you add mask expansion, you don't really know where it ends. And so by modifying the path of the mask, I can see exactly where it is. And that just gives me confidence that I'm not messing up, a company's corporate font by chopping it off a little bit, because you can guarantee that someone on their staff will see it and they'll say, that looks weird, and that'll be on you. So the more you know, right? So let's talk about how to animate this mask and do a text reveal. Well, it's really pretty simple. To bring up the mask properties, at least the mask path, with your layer selected, you can just press M on the keyboard. You can see that brings up the mask and the mask path. Right now, this is set to add. And I would say 99% of the time, this is how I work with a mask on a text. There's other mask modes, subtract, intersect, lighten, darken, difference, but add will work for me. The add mode means that anything inside this rectangular shape here is opaque. Anything outside is completely transparent, although you can modify the mask's opacity to change that. But really simply, this is going to work for us. So I'm going to press M on the keyboard and I'm going to drop a mask path keyframe right at 1 second. I'm going to go to the beginning of my comp. I'll double click my mask and I'll modify it. I'm just going to squish it down all the way to the right side. And now if I play this, boom, check that out. Very nice. I get a nice little mask reveal here from right to left. If I further modify this by bringing up the position, dropping a position keyframe. And to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to, in my comp viewer, I'm going to hit Control R to bring up rulers. I'm going to drag out a guide. When I reselect my layer here, press U on the keyboard. I'm going to go all the way to the beginning, and then I'm just going to pull over the position here to right about there. And now look what we have. Oh, check that out. We're getting a nice little text reveal that looks like it's coming out of kind of this edge of the text. You could do that backwards and have it come kind of left to right or bottom to top or top to bottom. Any number of those 4 different variations or something completely different. I don't know. If we select all the keyframes and hit F9 on the keyboard, jump into the graph editor, select these keyframes right here and pull out that handle. And if you need to see that again to figure out exactly what I did, go ahead and click and rewind, but I'm just showing you how what I would normally do. Now we've transformed that kind of boring animation into something that looks really pretty nice. We can add motion blur to this. I'll hit F4 on the keyboard and just enable motion blur. Check that out. That looks fantastic. So that's one way that you can do a very simple text reveal. Doing that is somewhat tedious, especially if you're doing that over multiple different text layers, but it's very basic, it's tried and true, and it works. It's used all the time. Let me show you another method. So I'm going to get rid of my mask here and delete my position keyframes. I'm also going to get rid of my rulers and get rid of my mask here. Another way that you can do a text reveal is to use some kind of track map. Now, a track map works in a similar way to a mask, except it's not necessarily linked to your text layer. So what I can do is grab the rectangle tool and I can deselect all of my layers. And then I can just over here in my comp viewer, click and drag a rectangle that covers up my text. Now, it doesn't matter what the color is because I can apply a track matte using the alpha, which is the transparency of the layer directly above my text layer. So if you hit F4 on the keyboard, that'll toggle between some of these switches here. And what you're looking for is the track matte, which you can see right here. And for my text layer, if I go over here to this drop down and I select Alpha Matte, you can see that, oh, check that out. The layer directly above has been turned off. The visibility switch has been turned off. And now it says Alpha. I'm going to switch back to my selection tool here. And now we can see the text. But if I move the text, oh, check that out. Anything that falls outside of this layer's alpha channel, meaning right now, if I turn this back on, these pixels are 100% opaque, and there are no pixels over here. So if I move my text layer over here, we can do all kinds of different text reveals with this track map. Let me just reset the position there. So we can do something somewhat similar to the example that I just showed. Without moving my shape layer here, I'll just drop a position keyframe, go to the beginning of the comp, and then I'll just move my text over here, easy ease that, grab this handle here, bada boom. I get basically the same exact animation, but it's using a different technique. It's using a track matte, which is this layer right here. This affords us some different options because there is a way to link the size of this shape layer to the size of the rectangle generated by this text here using an expression. But even without the expression, we can really quickly just adjust the size of this shape layer here by going into the properties and adjusting the size. Right now, the size is coming out from the center, but that actually works pretty well because I am using center aligned text here. So if I increased my letters in my text, like I just add the word super right in the middle, that's no problem. I can just zip, check that out. Really quickly, with like a couple of clicks, I can have a resized animation here that does the exact same thing. Now, doing that same thing with a mask would be a lot more tedious. It'd be kind of relining things up and messing with the mask shape. And you could additionally do things like, well, we could animate the size of this shape layer here. And maybe at 2 seconds, we just put this down to 0. And we have something that looks like this. Check that out. Very, very cool, right? There's a number of different things you can do. We can apply some blurring to this. So if I jump over to the effects and presets and I grab a Gaussian blur and I apply that to my matte layer, which I should name this. It's always good to name your mattes and any of your layers so they make sense to you. And I apply some blurring to this. Check this out. Now I have kind of a blurry edge to my text here, which also has kind of a different look to it. So there's a ton of different things you can do. Now, it's just a personal preference of mine to use a shape layer as a track map, but you can just as easily use a solid, and many people like to use solids instead. So if I set this to alpha matte again, now it's using this solid layer. And to get a kind of tighter matte, because right now you can see the size of my black solid here is the same size as my composition. I can get a tighter matte by just adjusting the scale of this like that, and I'll get a similar effect that I just had before with that shape layer. Or I can apply a mask to this layer. Control-Shift-N. I can double-click on my mask, and I can pull that down here. And so now I'm using a mask on this solid in a similar way that I was before with the mask on my text layer, except they're no longer kind of positionally linked. It's just another option that I wanted to show you. When you get into maybe using other After Effects templates from Envato or really anywhere, you may see a solid being used as a track map. So I just wanted to show you that. Lots of different options. And as we go along in this course, you're going to see these put to use. Coming up in the next lesson, you're going to learn how to build one of these text treatments in this Creative Titles package for Premiere Pro. I wanted to use this as an example because it's got a lot of very simple but very, very useful text animations. Things where we're doing some very simple kind of text reveals with boxes and lines. These are things that you see used all the time in all kinds of different projects, but you may not know how to create them. So in the next few lessons, I'm going to break down exactly how to create these types of animations. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to create a very simple text animation that looks just like this. Like I mentioned in the last lesson, I'm going to be using this template here found on Envato Elements for showing you how to do some very simple text animations and building them out with multiple layers and mats and shapes and things in After Effects, as well as a few more advanced things down the line. So let's check out this first one here and just kind of analyze what's going on. So we start with this shape box here that starts kind of flat with a very thin stroke. It goes skinny, the stroke gets bigger, so already we know that we need probably a shape layer, and we need to animate the size and the stroke on that shape. And then it gets wider, and we have this text kind of sliding in from the left side, so we need some kind of way to mat out the text so that it's not revealed over here, and then it is revealed inside this box right here. And also, if you look very closely, the text comes in not all at the same time. In fact, in my example comp, when I tried to recreate this, I didn't notice that right away, but I'm seeing it right now. So I'm going to show you how to do this as well to get the text to come in kind of like line 1, line 2, and 3 in this very nice and smooth way. I'll play it one more time so you can see how that works there. It's very subtle, but I think it looks really classy. All right. So let's jump into After Effects. I'm going to make a new composition. And then I'm just going to throw a temporary background. In my example comp, I'm using a video background from Envato Elements, but I'm just going to throw a black solid in here. And if you don't have a black solid in your solids folder, you can just come down here in your comp and hit Control Y to create a new black solid, or you can right click down here, choose new, and then solid is right here. Some of my menu is going off the screen a little bit. No worries though, multiple ways to do that. I'm just going to hit enter here and rename this BG for background, and then I'm just going to lock it so it doesn't get in my way. I'm also going to change some things here with this layout here because we got a few things that we don't need, and I like to have my character and my paragraph kind of easily accessible and not in kind of, I don't like the standard layout where it puts the paragraph down here. That's not really what I like. So I think the best way to go about building these types of animations is to work backwards from the final state of your animation. So that's what I'm going to do here. Now the font that I'm going to be using is not exactly the same one that they're using in the original, but it's another nice one that I found on Envato Elements. It's called Modelica. So I'm just going to click inside my comp with the type tool, and I'm going to type 3 lines of text. We'll call this creative boxed up animation. Doesn't really matter what it is, but there we go. If you look, I have the paragraph here and it is aligned to the left, and I'm just going to move that right in the middle of my comp here. In fact, even though this is aligned left, I can go ahead and recenter this anchor point here with the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-Home, and then just hit Control-Home to center up the layer. That's going to help me a little bit. And it looks like my caps lock was on when I created that. So it's given it a really weird name, and that's going to bug me. So I'm just going to redo that really quick. Caps lock off. Okay. Creative boxed up animation. Good enough. There we go. Right back to where we were a second ago. All right, I'm going to deselect everything down here in the layers so that I can grab the rectangle tool. And with the rectangle tool, I'm going to create a shape. I'm going to just create a basic box around my text. I want to make sure that the fill is set to none. and just give this a little bit of stroke, although you can change those things afterwards if you want. I also went ahead and changed in the preferences. If you go to Preferences General, there is an option to center anchor point in new shape layers. So to save me like 100 steps by creating a shape layer and then recentering the anchor point, you can just enable that, and then every time you create a shape layer, it will center the anchor point in that shape layer. So now with the anchor point centered, I can just hit Control Home, and that will center up my box here. Now I'm just going to make some small adjustments to the shape layer by going down into Contents, Rectangle, Rectangle Path. I'm going to deselect the Constrain Proportions here, or disable that, and just tighten up this box a little bit in the horizontal and vertical. Maybe something like that. And maybe I will make it a little bit wider, and then move my text kind of on just this one side. It's more similar to how the original design was. I'm also going to rename this, so I'm going to select Shape Layer 1, press Enter on the keyboard, and just rename it Box. Just whatever makes sense to you, that makes sense to me. So this is kind of the end state of the animation, more or less. You can tweak it to your heart's delight, but this is going to work for me. A couple of things we need to solve. One is we need some way to mat the text so that when we slide the text in from the left here, we don't see it kind of overhanging like this. That's not going to work. Now we could do that with a mask, but I'm going to show you a more clever way to do it. I'm going to take my box layer. I'm going to duplicate it and drag it down below this box here. I'm also going to change the color to fuchsia, press Enter on the keyboard, and name it Text Matte. I'm going to go down into the contents of this layer here. I'm going to get rid of the stroke just by selecting it and then deleting it, and I'm going to turn on the fill. Now I'm going to set my I can see that's getting in the way there. I'm going to set my creative boxed up animation text here to an alpha matte. So if you don't have this track matte option available, hit F4 on your keyboard and select alpha matte. And now if I move this outside, you can see, all right, we are really getting there now. Now it's just a matter of tweaking a few things and animating this essentially. One thing that I want to do is I want to link the size of the rectangle path here in my text matte. I want to link that to the size of my rectangle in my box because I'm going to be animating the shape of this, and I want to make sure that if I animate that, my text is not going to peek out in a weird way. So that's really easy to do. I'm just going to take the size here, and I'm going to use this pick whip, and I'm going to click and drag all the way up to the size on my box layer, and that will link those properties. So now if I adjust this here, you can see 684, 684, 717, 717. It's all linked up. We're good to go there. I'm also going to take my entire layer here, and I'm going to parent it with this pick whip right here. And this just makes sure that if I move this box layer anywhere, it's going to also move the matte. If I scale it, if I rotate it, it's going to basically make this text matte follow along exactly. I'm just going to select my box layer and hit Control Home to center that back up. With those two things parented or pick whipped together, that's really all I need to do. And now I can start kind of animating this out. And that's a good place to stop for this lesson. If you've been following along, really good job keeping up. I know we've gone in a lot of different directions and looked at a lot of different things, so congratulations for following along. Now, coming up in the next lesson, you're going to see how the rest of this animation gets put together, so check that out coming up next. In this lesson, we're going to pick up right where we left off in the last lesson, and you're going to see how the rest of this animation gets put together. So I'll pull down this original animation one more time, and let's just take a look at what that box does. Okay, so we start from kind of a small, skinny line here. It's already kind of a little bit wider, and then it grows up and skinny. And then from that point, it grows out wider. All right, so let's try and replicate that really quick. So I'm going to go to about 2.5 seconds up here. I'm going to drill down in my box and I'm going to set a keyframe for size. So this is going to be the final kind of width of my box here. I can adjust this later, but I think this works okay. Right about here. That should be good. Then I'm going to go back to, I don't know, somewhere in this neighborhood. Timing's not really super important at this point. And I'm going to make this skinny like it was. I'm going to move back a little bit further and I'm going to make this wide. Oops, I'm going to make this wide again, but I'm going to reduce the height a little bit. And then actually, I need to see it one more time. I forget exactly what it did. It's pretty close. Okay, so we go, it starts kind of wide and then it goes from there. Okay, so it's really kind of 3 moves. We go from, that's kind of the second move, and then right here, we're kind of all the way skinny like this. But actually, I'm not going to make this 0 because if you look what happens if I make the Y value 0, we lose this stroke on the end. And if I animate that, it's going to have this kind of bump out effect here. So I'm actually going to leave this at a value of 1 right here. I'll probably pull that all the way to the beginning. And then I'm also going to drill down on the stroke and I'm going to animate the stroke width. If I press U on the keyboard, I can just work with these keyframes here in these properties because those are the ones that I have modified. I'm going to pull out this stroke width with the value of 20 to here. And at the beginning here, I'm just going to change the stroke to 0. So let's see what we have so far. Okay, those are kind of the bones of the box animation there. And it does not look great. And that's because these are all linear keyframes. If we select all those keyframes and hit F9, we're going to be more in the neighborhood. Let's see it now. Okay, so yes, we're getting there. That is looking better. However, we need to adjust the curve of the speed graph here. So I'm going to select that set of keyframes, or it's just one keyframe there, and this keyframe here, and then pull these handles out. It looks like I missed a handle here, which is sometimes an issue when you're trying to modify these. I'm just going to grab the handle that I missed here and kind of match it up. And I think it's probably a shape something like this, where we have kind of a quick move here, and then it kind of slows down into the next thing. Let's check this out. Yes, that looks very close to the original. I'm not going to A/B them side by side, but I'm just take my word for it. It's pretty close. Very nice. If we want to slow this down maybe a little bit more, we can drag that out like that. We can also perhaps tighten up this bit of the animation. Just like that. Very good. Okay, so I'd say we're more than halfway there with the animation portion of this little treatment here. The next thing we need to do is get the text in here. And like I showed you, the text does 2 things. It slides in from the left, but the top line is moving, then the middle line, and then finally the third line kind of slides in. You can accomplish that a number of different ways. We can break this into 3 separate layers and animate them all separately. You can do that by hand, or we can use one of these animate properties that is special to text layers. Now, text layers in After Effects have a whole bunch of extra animation properties that you can enable or disable, and you can even enable per character 3D for some really cool effects. But I think all we need to do to accomplish this layer offset in the lines is to animate the position. This position animation can, by its default, is going to move all the characters. And then we can actually offset these to kind of do something like this, where we're moving individual characters, or we can change the shape to move like this. There's a ton of options here. And if I go through all of them, we're talking about a big, long lesson. I'm just going to show you how it's actually done. And how it's actually done is like this. If you drill down underneath the range selector in advanced, we're going to change the based on parameter here. Instead of characters, we're going to select lines. And that means it's going to basically move this as line 1, line 2, line 3. In fact, you can see that if we change this to index, this is basically looking at this layer in 3 lines. Very good. Okay. And so really simply, we can just do a very easy animation like this, where we're just animating the position from here to here, which doesn't look like it's right, but we're going to combine that with moving the position of the entire layer, and it's going to look right. So just kind of follow along, and when it's done, you're going to say, okay, now I get it. So right at about this point, when the box reaches its final size, I'm going to insert a position keyframe. And again, this is not the position of the entire layer. It's just kind of modifying the position of each one of these lines. I'm going to move back to this point right here, and I'm just going to offset them so they make kind of this diagonal line. You can see these little X's here represent where all the characters are. And that's really all I need to do. I'm going to go back to this point here, and I'm going to insert a position keyframe. Again, this is the position of the entire layer. And then I'm going to go back to this point right here again, where these two keyframes are, and I'm going to push this off this way. And then if I play it from this point, you're going to see, okay, I see, right? It's kind of doing the same thing as the original reference animation that we were looking at before. And so to kind of finish this off, all we need to do, select these keyframes here, hit F9, and we're going to maybe adjust this maybe to like 90% of this incoming influence here. And I think that should get it really close. Oh yeah, look at that. Now we are looking really nice. So let's preview the whole thing here. We'll set this to fit up to 100%. Turn off the graph editor. Very nice. I think that is really good. And it's just that easy. Now I know we ran into a little bit of sort of complicated ideas with the position, but when it comes to the text animation properties, these are something that can take a little bit of experimentation to get them to do what you want them to do. It's really sort of impossible to understand in one sitting, but the more you use it, the more you kind of understand how to manipulate it to get the results that you want. In fact, the first time that I recorded this lesson, I did it a slightly different way, and it didn't have the exact right look. So I re-recorded it once I figured out what I did wrong there. It does take a little bit of experimentation, but if you're willing to do a little experimentation, you can get some great looking results. The final step to this is to put a nice looking background in here. Now I downloaded some really cool looking backgrounds from Envato Elements, and I found one that was, I think it was this one, yeah, right here. So I'm going to use this as a background here. I'm going to pull this in and just put it above my black background. And this looks like it's a Ultra HD. So I'm just going to hit Control-Alt-Shift-G. That's a keyboard shortcut that you should memorize. And that's going to resize that to the layer in the, I believe, vertical. So if we go to, we right click on this, we go to Transform, Control-Alt-Shift-G, Fit to Comp Height. I always forget which one that is, but it's a little counterintuitive because Control-Alt-Shift-H fits to comp width, and you would think H is height, but no, that's not the way it works. But those are two that are really handy to memorize. Control-Alt-Shift-G, Control-Alt-Shift-H. Anyway, now that we have the background in here, you can see that it does look pretty cool the way it is right now. However, it's a little bit sharp for a background. So a couple different ways we can deal with that. How I dealt with that when I was building this the first time is I threw a blur layer on here. I used a box blur, fast box blur. If we throw that on here and we just crank that up a little bit, we're going to get a really nice effect that's not going to compete with the contrast of our text layer here. That looks pretty good. Another effect that looks even better is the camera lens blur. This effect looks a lot better. However, this is kind of a beast to render and will crush the life out of your system. You can see it does have a cooler look. In fact, I'll show you how to A/B this here. I'll just take a picture right here. And so this is with box blur. This is with camera lens blur. Box blur, camera lens blur. Actually, let me adjust this to make it a little more similar in terms of the level of blur. Yeah, that's probably it. All right. So here we have box blur, camera lens blur. Camera lens blur looks cooler. It's very, very similar to how, well, a camera would blur it. But it takes forever to render. So fast box blur is kind of a nice alternative. And if it's too bright for you, if you find that it's kind of competing, no worries. We can just throw a curves effect on here. Good old classic curves. And just maybe drop it down a little bit. Give it a little bit of a curve. And if you want to find this background, it's called abstract red and dark blue, geometric shapes, refraction. A little bit of a mouthful, but you can find that on Envato Elements. So let's check out how the whole thing looks here. Very cool. All right, thanks for sticking with me for this lesson. Coming up in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to create this text animation right here. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to build another great looking text treatment that looks something like this. This looks pretty simple, and this is another idea that I was inspired to create from that template that I showed you earlier. And what we have here are kind of two bars that slide across the screen that at some point start to reveal the text. So these are positioned above in the layer stack, these text items here. And the text seems to kind of originate from this point in space right here. Now, there's a few different ways that you can go about building something like this. In my mind, you can do it kind of the quick and dirty way, which is very fast, but not as easy to modify down the line. And then you can do it in a different way that takes a little bit more work up front, but is a little bit more modular down the road. For example, let's say that I wanted to change the text here, and I wanted to do something like this, just to make this a little bit bigger. You can see right off the bat here, well, I got some problems because now my mat is kind of messed up. But I've built this in such a way that I can just resize my mat and almost everything works. Just have to adjust the position of this rectangle here and then this rectangle here. And with those changes, check this out. I got a whole new thing and it totally fits my text. If I want this kind of ending rectangle here to be fatter, no problem. One little change there. Super easy. So I'm going to show you how to build this as quickly as I can. And to do it, I already have a comp set up right here. 1920 by 1080, 10 seconds long. I have a background solid in here that is locked so that I can't mess with it. The first thing I want to do is kind of lay out my text, right? I want to kind of build this out. So I'm going to be using Modelica again in this example. Molly, artist, and I'm going to, make sure that is right aligned. And actually, I will pull out a guide somewhere around there, just so I can pop that right there. I'm going to duplicate my text and Design Superstar. Or maybe, what did I put in the other one? Design Guru. That works. There we go. And then I'm going to change this to maybe regular or light. Looks great. Then the next thing that I want to do is I want to build out those rectangles and I want to make them nice and long. And I want to find maybe the spot that's right in between these two layers. I'm just going to eyeball it, something like that. I'm going to deselect my layers here, grab the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle. I do not need a stroke on this. And I'm thinking I may actually need a longer rectangle, but not to worry. I'm just going to jump into the shape properties here and just adjust this to get it down to where I need it to be. As long as I have this guide here, this will more or less kind of snap for me. And I'm just kind of positioning this. I just want it to get kind of an equal padding on the top and the bottom. It's a little bit fiddly to do here. Maybe like, probably 97 will work. And I think I can pull this down just a hair. That feels about right. Okay, very good. So I'm going to slide this over here. I'm going to set another guide, maybe right here, to just kind of give me some spacing here. And then I'll name this Rec 1. And I'll duplicate this, set this right down here. And that's pretty much it. That should work perfectly. Okay, the next step is I need to design a mat that will kind of do what I need it to do. I need it to mat on this side. I need it to mat on this side so that it kind of blocks the text and it cuts off my little rectangles here. So to do that, I'm going to use a shape layer. And I think I'll just create one kind of like this, and then I'm just going to slide this over on this side. That'll give me a little wiggle room over here. And I'm going to duplicate this and put it over here. And I'll align this to be right about there. Very good. Now, in order to change the shape of these layers, what I ideally would like is for some kind of control where I can make it scale from this point right here so that I can push it in without kind of losing the mat on this side. And then the same thing for over here. I want it to kind of push in from this side without losing my mat over on this side. I probably don't need it to stick out quite that far. But to do that, the easiest way, I think, is to grab the pan behind or anchor point tool and then grab the anchor point of this shape, so not the layer, and just kind of eyeball that and put it right over here. It doesn't have to be exact, but if you put it right on the line there, it'll be plenty good enough. I'm going to do the same thing to this shape over here. I don't think I need it quite that big, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to grab the pan behind tool and put that anchor point. There we go. I get it right over there. Now, if I dive down into the properties here, rectangle number 1, I'm just going to delete the stroke. Rectangle, actually, I'm going to delete the stroke on rectangle 1 and 2. I don't need those. And I also want to put an effect on here. If I go over to my effect and preset, I'm just going to put a slider control. And if you haven't used this before, don't worry. I'm going to call this right side, and then I'm going to duplicate this left side. This is all going to make total sense in just a minute. I'm going to set both of these to 100. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the scale. And this is the scale, again, of my rectangles. So it's not the scale of the entire layer. It's just the scale of these shapes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of an expression. I'm going to create an expression that looks like this. X equals, and then I'm going to use this pick whip here, and I'm going to pick whip this right side up here. Then I'm going to put a semicolon. Hit enter, Y equals, and then I'm just going to pick whip the value right here. And that's just going to lock it to 100%. Then I'm going to hit semicolon, I'm going to hit enter, begin bracket, and because this newer version of After Effects it's a little bit smarter, it's going to create the end bracket for me. And all I have to do is hit X, comma, Y. So if that doesn't make sense, essentially what I am doing, and I'll click away here, you'll see nothing has changed. But this expression basically says that I want to set the X parameter to whatever this slider control is. And that way I'll be able to modify it without having to jump down into the layer properties and go right to the scale every time. So it's saying X equals this and Y equals whatever this is. And I'm not going to modify it. So I'm just going to leave it to 100. Everything's going to work out perfectly. So I'm going to do the same thing. In fact, I can just copy this. I'm going to do the same thing to the transform controls of this rectangle right here. I'm going to Alt-click on scale and just paste this. And then I just need to modify a few things. I need to change the name here to left. And then right down here, I need to change the rectangle because I don't want it to be rectangle 2. I want it to be rectangle 1 because this rectangle here is rectangle 1. And this will allow me to be able to modify all of my mats in this composition with this one mat control layer. Check that out. Very cool. So I'm going to change the color of this to fuchsia by clicking right here. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this Rec Mat 1. I'm going to use this for my rectangle number 1. In fact, I'm going to pull rectangle 2 down here so that they are in order. Before I go any further, though, I want to link a few of these properties so that when I make adjustments to my master mat control, everything is reflected. Because right now, if you look at what's happening on Rec Mat 1, I also have controls on Rec Mat number 1 here, and I don't want those. So I'm going to delete those. It's going to come up with an error. No worries. I'm also going to make this full screen here. I'm going to click down in my comp timeline and then press the tilde key so that I can see what I'm doing. So let's select Rec Mat 1 here. Press UU on the keyboard. We can just scroll down. And then you can click in here where this expression is and just delete it. And then all we need to do, this is very simple. Rec number 2 here, rectangle number 2. We're going to go down to the scale right here, pick whip that all the way up to the scale of rectangle number 2 on the mat control layer. Okay, now those two are linked. We're going to do the same thing here to rectangle number 1. Take the scale, pick whip that to rectangle number 1's scale. That's it. We got a little bit into the weeds there with the expressions, but really it was pretty simple. And now I'm going to disable the visibility on this switch, take rec number 1 here and make that alpha inverted. And check this out. Now when I adjust this mat, it's also adjusting this mat down here. If I take this and I duplicate it, I'm going to pull this down above rec number 2, set this to alpha mat inverted. I don't have to change anything on that layer because it's duplicated from this first rec mat layer. And so now this is also linked. So if I make an adjustment here, check that out. It's also adjusting these two mats. I'm going to duplicate this one more time and reorder these text layers. So Molly's on top, Design's on bottom. And I'll call this text mat 1. I'm going to change this to alpha inverted. Duplicate this text mat 2, pull that above Design Guru here, change that to alpha mat inverted. Finally, to make sure that none of these mats here move or scale or do anything weird, I'm going to link them all to my mat control layer, and then I'm going to lock them so that the only one that I can actually move is this layer up here. And because it's not visible, it's going to be pretty tricky to move. So this kind of takes a lot of the variability out of the equation, and it prevents you from kind of moving anything around in an undesirable way. So I'm going to get rid of my guides here. I'm just going to turn those off. I can also turn off the rulers, set this back to fit up to 100%. So now it's time to do the animation, and we're going to jump into that coming up in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to pick up right where we left off in the last lesson, and we're going to do some animation and make it look like the text is revealing behind these rectangles, and it's going to look great. All right, so we built this entire kind of monstrosity here. I know it was maybe a little bit intense if you're newer to After Effects, but thanks for sticking with me. Now we have this really cool composition that's going to be really flexible for text that is different size, text that has a number of different characters in it, and we can do a lot of things very quickly to modify this in a number of different ways. So this is really cool. The next part of this is to do some animation. So I need to animate my rectangle number 1 and my rectangle number 2. And I'm going to slide these from left to right, maybe in a second and a half or so. So I'm going to bring up position and insert a keyframe. I'm going to come to the beginning of the composition, and I'm just going to click and drag here in the X and just pull them over here. Once they get to this point here where they're being covered up by the mat, I don't need to really pull it any further. When you're clicking and dragging, you can also hold down Shift, and that'll make the movement 10 times what it normally is. So you can get it to move across a little bit faster. So now we have this sort of thing. Very cool. To get that sort of offset effect, first what I'm going to do is select my keyframes, easy ease them. You guessed it, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to change this curve just a little bit, something like that. Okay, I think that's a little bit too long, actually. I'll make this like 2 seconds. And then all I need to do is just take this second rectangle and just pull it down the timeline a little bit. That's it. I mean, it's that simple to get that kind of really cool offset sort of effect. The next part of this is I'm going to animate the text, and I need to start that at 2 different times. So the text actually doesn't need to show up until right about here, maybe. And I'm going to animate the end position. So I'll go to maybe like 3.5 seconds. And this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, Alt-Shift-P. That's going to insert a position keyframe. Then I'm going to go to right here, and I'm going to slide the text over. But this time, I don't need it to start way over here. I'm going to have it start just behind my rectangle here. And I think the same thing for this layer right here. I'll just scrub down. Maybe I'll have it start right here. So I'm just going to slide the position over to right here. Have it come out kind of like that. Maybe tighten this up a little bit. Let's just look at what we have so far. Yeah, that's coming out really, really slow, but not to worry. Now, I did mention before that there are some third-party tools to help you and make modifying the keyframes easier. I want to show you one of those right now. This is an extension called Motion 3. It's just off the screen. I went to Window and then Extension. This tool is made by Mount MoGraph, and you can find that at mtmograph.com/motion. This is a third-party tool. It is 65 United States dollars, but it's really, really cool. And I wanted to show you that there are some really cool tools here to help you to really quickly adjust your keyframe speed and influence. So with this tool here, all I need to do is drag these sliders out, and it will give me kind of a visual representation of the speed curve that I want to have. And so actually for this animation with this text kind of flying out here, what I'd like is actually, I'd like it to come out really, really fast at the start, and then slowly come to a stop. And so I want this really drastic curve. And so instead of changing these from linear to Bezier and then going into the graph editor, I can basically do that all in one step. There we go. All right, let's see what we got now. Very cool. Like I showed you a second ago, you can adjust the keyframes here with the sliders. You can even input values here if you know specifically what you're looking for, or you can just click and drag in here to create the shape that you are looking for. So I think I want something like that. So when I do that, if I look over in the graph editor, check that out. Created that exact same shape, but it's a lot faster to do. And that's the exact motion that I wanted. I want it to start really fast and just kind of slide and come to a nice slow stop. So just like that, I have a nice looking animation. Let's look at the whole thing here. Perfect. And like I said before, if you need to adjust this, and we need to add another word here like Ella or something, and design senior or something. This is super easy to modify. You can see that the matte is cutting those off, but all I need to do is just extend this out over here and then make a few modifications to the keyframes. So that needs to go there, and then this needs to go there. And then I'll just adjust the position of that and the position of this rectangle. Whoops, this rectangle right here. Just like that. And within just a couple of seconds, I have a new animation that fits this new text here. I mean, if I didn't screw up a few of those clicks there, that would have taken probably under, I don't know, 10 seconds to do. And this is a nice technique to be able to get this sort of look here and have it be quite modular. Now, if this text wasn't positioned exactly where you wanted it to be, that is also not a problem. We could just take all of these layers here and just parent them to your matte layer, bring up the position of your matte layer. And because I made those mattes a little bit fatter, so they're sticking off the screen layer a little bit, we can reposition this. If we move it over too far here, I think the rectangles are going to bleed off that one side. So you may have to go back in and make some other modifications. For example, I think what you could do is you could just take this matte here and just add another matte right there and do the same thing down here. And then everything else should work fine. And now we can take the position of this and we can move it pretty much anywhere because everything else is being kind of matted out. So we can put this down kind of as a lower third right here. Just that easy. Thanks for sticking with me for this lesson. We learned how to kind of build something in a modular way. And I wanted to show you this Motion 3 extension here. It is a third-party tool and it's not free, but it's got a ton of great features. I definitely recommend going to mountmograph.com and checking it out. Check out the guide and check out all the cool things that you can do with it. Coming up in the next several lessons, you're going to learn how to take artwork that was created by a designer in something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, prep it for use in After Effects, and then animate that design in various ways. You're going to learn a few different techniques, including some write-on, some more expressions with inertial bounce and overshoot, and more. A lot of great stuff coming up in the next few lessons, so don't miss it. In this lesson, you will learn how to take a design made by a designer and prep it for work in After Effects. So at some point in your After Effects/animation journey, you're going to be given assets or full-on designs from a designer or some other third party. And these will not always be ready to animate the way they are. Sometimes they need a little bit of massaging in either Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop to be able to get them ready to work with in After Effects. And that's the case here. So this design was provided for me, and all of these assets came from Envato Elements. But if I were to import this Illustrator file, which is what this is, into After Effects the way it is right now, it would import as a flat layer. So I wouldn't have access to all of these individual elements, the text, the little burger bits here, the speed lines, the background, everything would be flat. And so there's not a whole lot I could do with it to make it very interesting. So you're going to learn how to take this from Illustrator and kind of prep it for After Effects. And this is a very useful sort of thing. It's the kind of thing that you do a lot when you're working with larger teams. So the first thing that I would do is in Illustrator, if you don't have the Layers panel pulled up, come over here to Window and make sure you pull up the Layers panel. And then if you select your top layer here, what you can do is you can click on this flyout over here, and for whatever reason, it's off the screen. So I'm going to pull it over like this, and you're going to choose Release to Layers Sequence. What that's going to do is that's going to essentially take all of those elements that are built into this layer and put them on their own layer. And then we can just pull them down so that they're on their own individual layers. You can see that the colors changed. And now if I were to import this into After Effects just like it is right now, we'd have access to all the individual layers. That's basically what you need to do, but let's go a little bit further and make this a little bit better. I'm just going to save this really quick so I have a separate file here. I'm just going to put an _1 on it. And then what I like to do is go through the layers and name them now, because when I import them into After Effects, I can rename the layers. However, if I move the Illustrator file and I need to relink it in After Effects, naming the layers in the file is going to be a big help. So I just turn on and off the eyeball here and figure out what is on which layer. And then I'm just going to label them. If you double click on the name here, you can just rename it. So I'm just going to call this lines. And that's the top bun right there. And this is the bottom stuff. And then we have this overlay layer. And we have the background. Sometimes if you double click just to the right of the name, it'll bring up the layer options. You can also use that to change the layer color as well. So that's very good. I can save this. Next, I want to import those assets. So I'm just going to double click in the project panel here, bring up the import window, and I'm going to navigate to where that Illustrator file is. The _1 is the one that I have renamed the layers. And I'll click import to bring that in. And then I'll get a dialog box here. And I have a couple of options. I want to make sure that I choose composition instead of footage. Footage will bring in a flat file. Composition will bring in all of the layers. And then underneath footage dimensions, I like to have layer size as opposed to document size. Layer size makes the bounding box of the individual layers fit around the layers instead of being the entire size of the document. And I'll click OK, and we'll bring that in. I'll double click to open up that composition, and I'll just give this a second to preview. All right, so there we go. We have it in After Effects, and things are looking pretty good. I have access to all of the individual layers. Very nice. And I can start animating this. Now, I'm going to give this a little bit of a treatment similar to a project that I worked on for a US company called Smashburger. Smashburger is an American fast food casual hamburger restaurant chain. They have 370 locations in 37 states and 9 countries. I ended up working on one of the pitch videos, and they won the account. So they are the agency of record. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this text here to kind of fly in from behind the viewer's perspective and kind of smash in here, and then have these lines kind of animate out, have the burger maybe fly apart. So let's get to work on animating this. I'm going to select the text here, and I have a couple of options for working with the text. I can work on it just like it is with this text layer here, or I can go back over to Illustrator and I can select the text, grab the text tool here and just select the text, copy it, jump over to After Effects, hit Control-T, bring up the text tool, and then just paste it. And then even though I wasn't selected on the right font or the right font size or anything like that, it's actually going to be pretty much exactly what I need to be able to place in here. For whatever reason, the spacing on this is not quite right. So I'm going to hold Alt and then use the left arrow to bring this over to line it up right. So if there's anything kind of interesting or clever that I wanted to do with the text animator in After Effects, that's how I could get the text to come over and be the exact same size and more or less the same placement very, very quickly. But I think for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just work with the vector layer here. Now, like I mentioned before, this font, Original Burger, came from Envato Elements, and you can find it right here. It's a great looking font. But I'm going to get rid of the text layer, and I'm just going to work with the vectorized text layer right here. So I'm going to create a mask around this. I'm going to hit Q to bring up the rectangle tool and just draw a rectangular mask around the word best. And I'll just kind of size that up. Sometimes if the masks aren't like centered around the layers, it just gives me anxiety. And I'm going to rename the layer to best text. And then I'm going to duplicate it, Control-D, hit Enter on the keyboard, and rename this burger text. And then on the burger text layer, I'm just going to double click my mask, grab the top of the transform handle here and just pull it down for the burger part right here. And then just kind of resize that for this word right down here. I'll click away, and that mask looks fantastic. If I select both of these layers and then do Control-Alt-Home, that'll recenter the anchor points in the middle of the layers, and that looks great. So what I want to do for the animation portion of this is I want to have these fly in. So you may be thinking a scale animation would work, and indeed it will. So with my best text layer selected, I'm going to hit S to bring up the scale. I'm going to click the stopwatch to insert a keyframe. I'm maybe 8 frames in. By the way, let's just check the composition settings here. I actually didn't even look to see what the resolution was of the project, but it is looking good. It's 1920 by 1080, and it came in, and we're working at 29.97. That's something good to kind of work out before you get too far down the road here. And I think actually we can make this just a 5-second animation. We'll make this pretty quick. So I have my scale keyframe here at frame 8. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm just going to scale this up just an absurd amount like that, so I can't see it. And if I play this, let's see what's going to happen. Okay. All right. So it looks like it kind of starts slow, and then it gets like, whoa, it goes from here to there in 1 frame. And if you're wondering why it gets kind of janky looking here, that's because we need to turn on the continuously rasterize button right here. And we can probably do that for all of these layers. And in fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to take these 2 layers right here, and I'm just going to lock them to prevent me from messing with them. You can see once I toggled on that continuously rasterize button there, now this looks nice and smooth. But the motion is kind of weird. I want to make some more room here so that you can see. I'm going to select my keyframes, right-click on them, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then choose Exponential Scale. What that'll do is that will make the scale, if we look at the graph editor here, check this out. Now our scale has this kind of exponential curve to it, and if we play it back, now it's looking a little bit nicer. It's coming in, I think, more how you would expect it to kind of fly in. And we can adjust this to make it longer or shorter by selecting all of these keyframes and then holding down Alt, grabbing the last keyframe, and pulling and dragging. And what this will do is basically compress all of those keyframes to make this animation shorter or faster. So that's one way that you can do it. Another way, which is somewhat similar, is we can add a 3D kind of virtual camera in here. So I'm going to right-click and go to New Camera. I'm going to make this 35 millimeters. I don't need depth of field on, and just click OK. It's going to tell me, hey, you don't have anything 3D in here, and I'm just going to click OK. That's totally fine, because I'm going to make my 2 text layers 3D. And I'm going to show you a slightly different method to get the same kind of motion with less keyframes. So instead of animating the scale, what I'm going to do is animate the position. So at about the same spot, frame 8, I'm going to drop a position keyframe. I'm going to come back to the beginning, and then I'm just going to fly my text out in the Z axis here, or in the Z direction. And you can see it kind of looks like it's going a little bit off to the left there. So I'm just going to bring that down and maybe even pull it down in the Y axis as well. Let's see what that looks like. Very cool. Let's just make it shorter. I like that. Just keep it linear. We'll keep it cool and linear for now. I want to do the same thing with my burger text. I'm going to come right here, and I'll use the keyboard shortcut to drop a position keyframe. Then I'll come back to the beginning and fly my text out towards the camera, then maybe kind of center it up a little bit more. And then what I want to do is I'm actually going to pull my burger layer down below my best text layer, and then push it down the timeline just a hair, like that. Maybe I'll enable motion blur here. That looks pretty cool. Very cool. Maybe offset it 1 more frame, and then push this one out just a little more so we don't see it on the first frame. Cool. I think that looks fantastic. So the text is looking pretty good right now, and it's time to move on to some of these other elements. And I'm going to show you how to do that coming up in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last lesson, talking about how to animate this best burger design. Continuing on, we have the text kind of ironed out here. The text is flying in. It's looking pretty cool. I like the way that's coming in here. What I'd like to have happen is when the best burger hits, I want these lines to kind of fly out and maybe even do kind of an animated wiggle. So let's look at how to do that. First, what I want to do is I am going to right-click on the lines layer, come up to Create, and then Create Shapes from Vector Layer. And then I'll just take this and move it down. I'll maybe put the shy switch on and then lock it and then hide it. That way it doesn't get in the way. So by converting this to a shape layer, I now have access to the individual paths here. So there's a few things that I could do with that, and I can do some clever things, but actually all I really want to do is come down to Contents, and then right across from there, I want to add a wiggle paths. And if you don't have any of these shapes selected or any of the groups selected, it's going to put that wiggle paths on the bottom. If it didn't, just find wherever it put the wiggle paths and pull it down to the bottom of the stack. And what that's going to do is it's going to wiggle all of the lines in here. If we just hit play here, you can see what that's going to do. And I'm sure you're thinking, that does not look very good. And you are correct. That does not look very good. But we can tweak it. What I want to have it look like is the kind of hand-drawn animation thing where it looks like you sort of drew a thing, and then you drew it again, and you drew it again on 3 different sorts of piece of paper, if you will, and then it sort of animates between them, and it has like this really cool animation effect. That's probably not a great way to explain it, but once you see how we're going to modify it, it's going to all make sense. I'm going to switch the points from corner to smooth. I'm going to bring down the detail here, maybe to something really low, like, I don't know, 1.5. And then I'll bring down the size to, I don't know, 3. And then I'm going to push up the wiggles per second to 15. And now when I play this, you see, that's what I was talking about. I want this kind of wiggly, kind of animated look here. Might be able to increase the detail maybe to like 2 or something. If we push it up too much, we're going to get like some weird blobby stuff in here, and that's not going to look so hot. So I think 1 or 2 will probably work fine. That's looking cool. And the next, I want to animate these lines coming from kind of the center out. So I'm just going to solo up the lines here. That'll make things a little bit more snappy. And I think the easiest way to do that is just with a matte layer. They're going to come out pretty quick, or I'd like them to come out pretty quick. So I can get away with using just kind of a shape layer here. And so I'm just going to draw one with the pen tool. So I'm just going to click and drag with no other layer selected, and that's going to create a new shape layer. And I'll just make a kind of crude shape here because I want it to start very close to the inside edge of these lines, kind of like this, without touching them. I can probably get away with making that linear, and then something like this. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to dive down into the contents, into the shape, into the path, and put a path keyframe right here. I'm going to move this keyframe maybe more. I'll just move it in the beginning of the layer for now, because this is where we're going to start. And then I'll come maybe, I don't know, let's go 8 frames. It'll probably change. And then if I double click on my path here, what I want to do is just scale it up. And if I hold Control and Shift, I can constrain the proportions and kind of move everything in a uniform way around the center anchor point. And so now it's just going to go from here, bloop, to there. It's just going to get nice and fat. And then I probably want to ease these and then jump in here and modify this curve such that it flies out like this. So pull this handle all the way to the left, pull this one all the way to the left, like that. Cool. I'm going to select the layer, name it Lines Matte. Very good. Pull it down above my Lines Outline layer. Hit F4 on the keyboard to switch or toggle the modes, and then take my Lines Outline and set it to Alpha Matte. And now my lines should draw on, bloop, just like that. Very cool. And we'll go frame by frame here. I just want to see what's happening. Okay. Looks like maybe they're coming on a little strong. And I think if we modify this path a little bit, so I'm going to select the pen tool again. I'll just control click so I don't have anything selected. And then I'm just going to bring these points around because I think what I'd like is I'd like a tighter shape in here. And that way it'll look like things are drawing on, I think, a little bit more uniformly. You're just going to have to take my word on that until you see what this is going to look like. So I'm just going to try and keep this matte as tight as I can around these lines. And let's see how that looks. I like that. That's cool. All right, very good. So I'm going to unsolo my lines outline. And I want to line this up for right when the burger sort of hits, the best burger. So somewhere in here, I want it to start flying out. Right about there. And I can also turn motion blur on like this. So let's see what this looks like at this point. Very cool. Not too bad. The other thing that I'd like to have happen is I'd like this burger to start kind of from a closed, well, not exploded position, and then kind of explode up just before the text gets there. So to do that, I'm actually going to just change the color of this text here so that I can keep track of it and then move all of this down the timeline just a little bit. And then I'm going to take my burger buns here, and right about here, I'm going to drop a position keyframe. All right, and then I'll go back to the beginning here, and I think what I'd like is I'm going to move this burger bun down and move this burger bun up. And we have a little bit of a problem because you may have not realized it before this point, but this Illustrator graphic they're just basically outlines. So there is no kind of background fill in each one of these elements. That's something that we can fix, so definitely stay tuned for that. But I think for the amount of frames this is going to be on, it's not a big deal at this point in time. I'm going to have it start here and kind of fly out like this and make room for this burger to fly in. I'm just going to hit F9 on the keyframes here. Hit this button here, which will fit all graphs to view, so I can just see these a little bit bigger. And then I'll just give these a little bit of a curve here, like that. I think that looks good. The timing is not perfect, like I said before, so I think I'm going to slide this stuff forward. Perfect. Yeah, just like that. I want it just sliding out of the way. Boom! Just like that. Now, I think the effect that I would like to see is I'd like the bun, the top bun and the bottom kind of burger stuff here to continue to basically expand. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new null object. And I prefer to have the anchor points in the center of my null layer. So I did the Control Alt Home and then Control Home to kind of recenter that up there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up here and then I'll hold Control. And if I'm close to the anchor point on that top bun, it should snap right there. And I'm just going to name this null right down here. I'm going to hit Enter on the keyboard and name this top bun. CONT is my abbreviation for controller. And I'm going to bring that down here, put it right above the top bun. I may even select both of these and change them to fuchsia so I can keep track of the layers. And then I'm going to take the top bun layer and parent that to this top bun controller. That way, after this initial move, I can really easily create some secondary motion by just animating this null. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt-Shift-P and Alt-Shift-R to drop in a position and a rotation keyframe. And then I will go to the end of the timeline, move this up a little bit, and maybe rotate it a little bit like that. Now, I'm going to go to my solids here and just drag down another null. I don't necessarily have to make another one. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine to keep my projects as tight as possible. I like to just keep using the same null over and over. So I'm just going to make this null an adjustment layer, and that will essentially make it transparent. And then I'm going to come right down here and hold Control again and just snap the anchor point to my bottom stuff layer. I'll rename this to bottom stuff CONT for controller, and then parent my bottom stuff layer to my null here. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this null. I'm going to hold Alt Shift and then hit P and then R to drop a position in a rotation keyframe. I'll go to the end of the timeline, and this time I'm going to push the burger down, and then I'm just going to rotate it maybe opposite of what I had before. Okay, so let's look at what I have right now. I'm just going to fit to view. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. All right, let's check this out. Oh, I love it. I think it looks so cool. That's a good place to stop for this lesson. Make sure to check out the next lesson where you're going to learn how to put some final touches on this animation. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to put some final touches on this animation, including using an inertial bounce expression. Final touches on this little animation here. What I'm going to do is drag down another null. Yes, I do like using null layers. And I'm going to call this shaker. I'm going to make this an adjustment layer just to make it invisible. The effect that I want to go for here is I want to make the text look like it has some weight to it. So when the text kind of hits, so right about here, boom, I want all of these elements to push back in space and look like they're kind of shaking, kind of like a meteor impact, if you will. You know, it comes down really hard and we get this little aftershake sort of deal going on. Even though I have some 3D elements, it really doesn't matter because all I need to do is select my burger text, the best text, the line outline. In fact, I can also select the lines matte here, the top bun controller, the bottom bun controller. And then I'm going to take all of those and parent that to this shaker layer. And now what I'm going to do with the shaker layer is I'm going to hit S on the keyboard and bring up scale, and then I'm going to take my best text here and press U, and that'll reveal any keyframes that I have placed on the timeline. And right about when the best word hits, or maybe a frame after, maybe right here, I'll go one frame ahead of there and I will put a scale keyframe on my shaker null, and then I'll go maybe 2 frames down the timeline and I'll set this to something like 92 something. And then I'll go 2 frames forward, boom. Now at this point in time, if I hit U on my burger text, that has hit. And so I will return my scale back to 100%. Okay, let's just look at what we have so far. Boom. Okay, that looks sort of gross. I admit that was not very fantastic at all. But I'm going to show you an expression that's going to make that look really cool. And that expression is called inertial bounce. Inertial bounce is kind of a way to create a really sort of lifelike motion to your animations. In this particular case, I'm going to give that scale animation some inertial bounce. Essentially what it does is it calculates, I think, some velocity, and then it draws a sine wave and then decays it over time. If all that sounds like nerd business, don't worry. Just go to Google and type in inertial bounce After Effects. I can almost guarantee the top result will be top 5 AE expressions from graymachine.com. All of these are really good expressions, and you should definitely check some of them out. But the one we're concerned with the most is the first one right here, inertial bounce. So just copy this text right here. I'm just going to copy that there. And then over in After Effects, I'm going to Alt-click the scale stopwatch. And then in this space down here, I'm going to paste that expression. And just by doing that, check out what I have now. Whoa. Okay, I'm going to roll it back to the beginning. So what that inertial bounce expression did is I'm going to bring up the graph editor, and then down here under scale, I'm going to click this show post expression graph. It's sort of calculating the motion right here, and then it creates a sine wave based on a specific frequency. and then that sine wave decays over time. This very much mimics essentially what all motion does to some extent. Now, it's not super smooth right now, and I'm going to change a few things, but I just wanted to show you what that expression is doing behind the scenes. Now, we can change this if we go into the expression. I'm just going to make some room here. And I know this is a bunch of techno mumbo jumbo, but the only things we really need to look at are the top 3 lines. Amp, which stands for amplitude, frequency, or freak, which stands for frequency, and decay. What I usually like to do with this expression is change the frequency from 2 to 1.5, because I think 2 is just too much. I like these sort of inertial bounce movements to be a little bit slower. Then I'm going to turn up the decay, which is going to make it stop moving faster. So I'm going to turn it up from 2 to, let's try 5. You don't need to put 5.0, just 5 is fine. And then let's see the difference in what that's going to do. Okay. And if we look at the graph editor again, you can see that now what's happening is we have kind of an overshoot, if you will, where it goes past 100% and then it dips back down to negative scale, and then it comes back up, and then it goes back down, and then it just kind of settles. So we're getting a little bit less of that. Before we were waving way down the timeline here, and now it's just kind of boom, and then it just kind of settles out. But let's just watch. What I like about this is it just makes it feel like that text has some really nice weight to it. Now we can smooth this out a little further by taking this middle keyframe and easing it. And now if we look at the expression, you can see that this top part of the expression is just a little bit smoother. And I think that might look a little bit better. It's really going to be pretty subtle, but let's check it out. Boom. Let's watch that one more time. And we can adjust the intensity of that by moving around these keyframes. So if we want it to be more intense, we're going to make the last part of this expression, we're just going to nudge this to basically make it one frame apart. And that's going to make it just a little bit more impactful. However, that means it's going to, it's still going to have the same amount of decay. So we're making a bigger wave up front, but it's still going to have the same kind of decay on the back end. And yeah, if we want it to be even a little less, we can just change this percentage, this scale keyframe here from 92 to maybe like 95, and that'll just be a little bit more subtle. So let's check that out. But I think the effect is pretty cool because it looks like, boom, the text comes in, and then it just looks like it's kind of exploding there, which I think is pretty cool. If you want even more decay, we'll just turn this up to like 7. Now let's check it out. And now it's really dampened the expression or the movement. This to me feels like it's in a really good place. If at the beginning this sort of thing bothered you, where we're seeing this layer bleed through the bottom, really easy thing that we can do by going over to Illustrator, and if we can find our top bun layer here, we can grab the group selection tool, and we'll just kind of zoom into the edge here. And if you just click the path that's closest to the edge, that'll select that. Here, well, let me deselect, and then I'll just click that path. You see how that path right there on the outside is selected? I'm going to copy that. I'll come back over to After Effects, and I'll just create a new shape layer. So new shape layer. And then if I come down here and I just add a path, I should be able to select the path and then just paste that path from Illustrator right in here. Now I have that exact shape right here. And to give it some fill, what I would do is just add a fill right here. And then I can change that color to kind of this darker color here. And then I'm going to take this and just kind of align it with the bun layer. And like that. I'm going to select the layer, hit enter, rename it to top bun fill. And then I'm going to put it below my top bun. Let's see if I can nudge it over and get it right there. I like to try and align those as close as I can, but you may find, depending on what you're filling the back with, that can be a little bit tricky. One thing you can do is just get it close and then come down here and then add an offset paths. And if that is below your paths, what you can do is just set this to like -1. And that's just going to, if I solo this, that's just going to shrink it up a tiny bit. If I do -2, you can see it shrinks it up a little bit more. So that way it's going to live basically between the edge of this path here and this white area here. So I won't have any bleed over. However, I don't think it's really going to matter for this. And if I wanted to fill this with the background, that's no problem. What I would do is take my background layers right here, and I would pre-compose them. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C, and I'll call this BG for background. Then I'm going to duplicate these, bring them up just underneath my top bun fill layer, and then hopefully you know where I'm going now, but if not, I'm going to hit F4 on the keyboard to bring up the track matte options, and I'm going to set it to alpha matte. And essentially what that is going to do, if we solo this, it's just going to paint the background in wherever that bun fill layer is. And in order to get this bun fill layer to follow where my top bun is, I'm going to parent it to my top bun. And so now I have a really nice way to block out all of this junk from my bun layer. So check that out. Everything else is exactly the same. We're just sort of painting out that little kind of overlap. And this is something that we just needed to deal with because the art wasn't exactly what we needed it to be for this animation. But everything else I think is looking pretty nice. Coming up in the next lesson, you will learn some more great looking techniques for animating some pre-made designs in After Effects.
Hey video creators, with Envato Elements you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial licenses for one low cost. Because no matter which video you're creating, Envato Elements has everything you need. Get creative with unlimited downloads of royalty-free stock footage, video templates, audio, and millions of other creative assets.
Whoa.
All right, people, let's move on. So this is where Mike stands, and this is where the dinosaur comes in.
Yeah, Envato Elements is where you find and download everything. Motion graphics, dinosaurs, and create even more with social media assets, online content, everything.
Everything. Literally everything.
Music tracks, sound effects. Thank you. Everything you need for your videos, it's all unlimited. Deliver better videos faster with Envato Elements. Get started today.
In this lesson, you're going to learn how to animate another pre-made design from Adobe Illustrator. We're going to be looking at some 2.5D with an After Effects camera and some interesting techniques to get this to look really fun with some lens flares. All right, so just like in some previous lessons, I'm in Adobe Illustrator and I need to release this to layers. So I'm going to come over here to the layers panel in the little flyout menu and choose Release to Layers. Then I'm going to pull these out of this layer stack here, delete the top layer, and then just rename these. So I'll call this Text, this is Overlay, and this is Background. Perfect. That was simple, wasn't it? Then I'm going to just save this, and I'm going to take the original file name, just do an _1, press Enter, and then click OK. Then I'm going to jump over to the After Effects. Now, before I get too far in After Effects, let me just save this. Always a good thing to do. Then I'll double-click and import my Illustrator file. I'm going to import it as a composition, and I'm going to leave the footage dimension to layer size. Perfect. Then I'm going to double-click this composition in the project panel to open it up. So this is what we're looking at here. It's not terribly exciting. It would be pretty cool if I had access to this, what I would guess is an After Effects file with all this really cool kind of HUD technology looking stuff, and I could do some fun animation, although that would be really complicated. What I have to work with is just a flat image. So to make this look interesting, what I think will work is to do some kind of 2.5D, which is the After Effects version of 3D. After Effects can do some more 3D rendering stuff, but when we're dealing with flat planes that have no depth to them, it's really kind of a 2.5D sort of effect. And let me show you how that works. I'm going to take my text layer, and I'm going to take my background layer, and I'm going to make those 3D by clicking the 3D layer switch right here. If you don't see those, you can press F4 on the keyboard. Whoops, I actually pressed F3. So F4 will toggle those layer switches for you there. And then I'm going to right click here, choose New Camera, and I'm going to do a 35 millimeter. I don't need depth of field on. Perfect. I'll click OK. Now, if you press C on the keyboard, that'll bring up the camera tool. And if you click and drag, that will orbit. And you're going to think, well, that doesn't look very 3D at all. And you are correct. And that's because these layers are in the same 3D position. If we hit P and we bring up the position with the text and the background layer selected, you can see that their Z position, so we have X, Y, and Z, is exactly the same. But if we take the background layer and we come over to the Z position and we just push it back in Z space by a fair amount, like that, whatever that might be, and then we scale this back up, it's going to look exactly the same. But when we go back to our camera tool and we orbit again, okay, now it's looking a little bit more 3D. We're getting this kind of perspective shift here, or a parallax effect. And that's what we're going to be going for. That's going to sell this sort of 3D look. Now, on top of that, I'm going to take my background layer here and I'm going to add a CC lens, which I already have pulled up in my effects and presets panel. So I'm going to drag that over to my background, and that's not what I'm going for. So I'm going to come over here to the effects controls and increase the size. Now, you may notice that when you increase the size, you're going to say, whoa, that's pretty cool looking. And you can use CC Lens for some really trippy sort of effects and transitions. In fact, one of the most popular sort of warp transition packs that's been out for a while uses this CC Lens effect to great, well, effect, to create some really cool looking warp style transitions. It's really cool. So I'm going to increase the size here, and then I'm going to animate the center to give it this sort of warp looking effect. And that's really going to sell this sort of 3D parallax effect. In fact, we don't even really have to move the camera, or I suppose move anything in 3D, because if we animate the position of this, so let me undo that, and I'll just drop a position keyframe here, pull that out to like 3 seconds, and then I'll just move this over here, and then I'll come over to my background layer, I'll reset the center, drop a keyframe right here, and then just push this maybe like this. If I just do that, it kind of has a parallax sort of effect. It may work better actually if I move this over to the other side. Let's try that. Yeah, look at that. Your brain is telling you that you are looking at something that has a 3D sort of aspect to it, a 3D perspective, if you will, when it's not at all. I could make these 2D layers and it will essentially look exactly the same. Check this out. I'll just reset the scale, and it has a 3D sort of effect to it. But it's not. It's not in 3D space, and it wasn't using the After Effects camera at all. But we're going to make it look even more 3D, so I'm just going to reset this here. And I'll reset the center. Yeah, okay, great. That's reset. And to this animation, I'm going to add a null object. And I'm going to make my null 3D. And I think I'm just going to parent the camera to my null. I'll hit enter and name this cam control. And then if I pull up the rotation here, I can do some rotation for this. And that will essentially orbit the camera around the center. And that's going to give us a really nice sort of 3D look. It's going to be a little bit more than what I was doing a second ago. So I think I'm going to come to about 5 seconds and then drop a keyframe on the Y rotation, come back to the beginning and maybe do, I don't know. I don't want to do something too drastic, but maybe like 10 degrees. And I'm just going to animate from here to there. All right. So at 5 seconds, I'm also going to come down to the background layer here and drop a keyframe on this CC lens effect for center. And then I'm going to push this maybe over in this direction. Now it doesn't look exactly right, but let me see if the motion is right. No, okay. I think that was the wrong way. I think I need to go this way. There we go. I think that's right. I think that's has the right look to it. Essentially, the camera is going to do that parallax effect, but in this case, I just want to use the CC lens effect to give it a little bit more warping in the edges. So let me see. I will change the view to fit up to 100%. And you'll see that the edges kind of have this warp effect, almost like the background is bent, the way it's kind of pulling out here. And if we adjust the scale, or the size rather, that'll become more drastic. Although we do want to fill it a little bit. So you can adjust the size to fill it, or you can just scale up the layer if you want to. Either way. So if I increase the scale of the layer, then I can pull the size down, and that should make this effect a little bit more drastic. Right now it is pretty subtle. Let's see if that looks any better. It's definitely doing a pretty good amount of warping over here. You can see it particularly in the corners. It's doing a nice warp there. All right, I think that's pretty good so far. So I'm going to select these keyframes, and I think actually I'll just take the end keyframes and just ease into them by pressing F9 on the keyboard. Let me just preview what this looks like here. Okay, pretty good. I think also I might want to do a position animation here on this null. And I think I'd probably want to push in on this and then pull back, which will be just a little bit more dynamic. It's not incredibly fancy. And I'm just going to trim up the composition to the work area there. But I think it works. And this is a good place to stop for this lesson. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to really punch up this title here with some cool text effects. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, we're going to punch up this text with some cool text effects and give it a really cool kind of electronic-y look. All right, I'm going to jump over to my project panel here. I'm going to select my text layer in the outer space scene _1 layers. These are the Illustrator layers. So I'm going to select my text here and then replace with pre-comp. Then I'm going to double click that to open it. And actually, if we look at this comp right here, you can see that that layer has been replaced with the text pre-composition. If you double click this, that's going to open up the same comp here. So what I want to do in this comp here is animate the text to do something a little bit more interesting. And I want to get access to the text characters here. So to do that, I'm going to double click on the text and I'm going to copy it from Adobe Illustrator. And then in After Effects, I'm going to grab the type tool, just drop it in anywhere and then paste and then press Enter on the numeric keyboard. And now I have that text exactly as it appeared in Adobe Illustrator. Any kind of weird formatting that might have been done in Illustrator transfers over to After Effects. It's very handy that way. Now what I'd like to do is convert this text to shape layers. Now you may be wondering why I just didn't take the text layer here and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. And that's because for whatever reason, it doesn't work with some text layers. So we'll just paste the text from Illustrator and that works totally fine. So on my text layer now, I'm going to right click, choose Create, and then Create Shapes from Text. Now, if I didn't mention this before, this Gempire font is from Envato Elements. Tons of great fonts there, and this is one of them. So let's look at this shape layer that I just created. I'm going to drill down. It looks exactly like the text, but what I want to do is give it kind of a stroke effect. And I want to animate the strokes around the text and then have the fill kind of flash in. And I'm going to do that on a few separate layers here. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to expand all of these layers here. In fact, I'll just hit the tilde key so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to grab all the fills and strokes and delete them. Now you could just turn them off up here, but that's going to get a little bit confusing down the road. So I'm just going to delete them. Then I'm going to come over here, and with the content selected, I'm going to choose add and then stroke. And that's going to put a stroke down at the bottom of this stack. And that way I can control one stroke for the entire layer. All the shapes will have this stroke, and it just makes it easier to animate. So let me hit the tilde key again, and let's look at what is going on here. So that's too much stroke, I can tell. I'm also going to have the stroke match the color of the text. So I'll just use the eyedropper tool there. Perfect. Then what I would like to do is I would like to add a trim paths. So I'll just select contents and then trim paths, which is just off the screen there. Let me just pull this up so you can see. Trim paths. Okay. And that put the trim paths at the bottom of all of these groups, which means that the trim paths will essentially affect everything that's above it. And if I just pull down the end, I can kind of see what I want it to do. So there's two things that I want to animate here, and I'll just animate them right now. I'm going to come back to the beginning of the comp here. I'll drop a keyframe on end and offset. Then I'll go to about 3 seconds. I'll put the end at 100%. And I'll put the offset to 1, which will do essentially 1 full revolution or rotation of the offset. And then when I play this, you can see what it's going to do. It's got this really cool kind of wrapping line effect. Now, if you pay attention to what's happening in the O right here, something strange is going on. It looks like the line sort of stops right here, and then it draws the middle line. It completes the middle line, and then it goes back to the outer line, and then it starts taking away some from the middle, and then putting some back. It's very sort of busy, and I don't like it. And what I discovered is that the reason it's doing this is because the O is made up of 2 groups here. So we have a path on this group and a path, or 2 separate paths rather. And each one of these paths then has a merge path applied to it. And the merge path is basically to subtract this middle bit from the outer bit here so that when it's filled, it doesn't look like just one oval. It's got a hole in the middle. But you see, I don't actually need the fill. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this merge path here in the O, the R, and then the other O. And now when this plays, you're going to see that the lines do what they should do. And that's continually move without stopping, which I think you'll agree looks a lot better, especially for the O. Now, would you actually be able to notice that it's doing this weird thing with the O and the R and the O? I don't know. Maybe. I don't like it, so I'm going to get rid of those merge paths. Finally, I'm going to select the keyframes here and just apply some easy ease with the F9 key. Let's see what we have. Okay, not bad. I also might like to change the line cap here from this butt cap to a round cap. So I'm just going to select the layer here, and then I'm going to use the butt capper script, which is free, to change all of the caps. Super easy. Now, if you don't like the 90-degree or hard kind of corner here, you can also change the line join style to round by alt-clicking using this. And that has a nice look as well. Okay, so right at 3 seconds, what I would like is for the fill on this layer to come in. I love Phil. He's a great guy. And then on my stroke layer here, I'm going to animate the stroke width from whatever it is down to 0, like this. So it's going to come in like this. It's going to wrap around, bada boom. And then it's going to go down to 0. Now, I think that was probably too slow. And this could probably go more like 2 seconds, I think. I think that'll look good. But we'll look at it in a second. So I'll make some small adjustments there just on timing. Let's jump back to this scene and check out what I have so far. Yes, that feels right, I think. I think that looks right. Now, it doesn't have quite the right look to it at the moment. I want it to have kind of a glow sense about it, something that indicates that it's maybe giving off some light. So a couple different ways that we can do that. One, I can set this to additive blend mode, and that will give it, well, sort of this kind of light type properties to it. I could also add a glow. I'm going to set that back to normal. So with my effects console here, I'm just going to add a glow. That's the same as just coming over here to the effects and presets and typing in glow. It's just a little bit faster. The FX console is a free plugin from Video Copilot. And if you use After Effects, you should definitely check it out. So I'm going to jack up this glow here. And I'm going to turn up the glow radius and maybe the threshold. I want it to kind of almost be looking like it's going to white and the glow is more bluish. I don't know, something like that maybe. Sometimes it takes multiple glows, so you may have to kind of stack this. And then, you might shrink this down, and this one might be like this. And then you might adjust the intensity of the glow to get it to look how you want. I think that actually looks pretty good just like that. There are some third-party glows that are pretty cool looking as well, and I'm going to show you that in this comp here. In fact, I will make this comp much bigger, like that. And I'm going to show you a third-party glow called Deep Glow, which I now see is not going to work because I need to apply it on this layer. And Deep Glow looks really, really cool. It's got a different way of applying the glow, and it has this look to it that I think is fantastic. Now, if I wanted to get this to work right, I would have to increase the height here, maybe lose some of the width. There we go. And I think that just looks really fantastic. And that's just in its kind of stock iteration here. If I copied that to my lines, that would look even crazier. It might just pull down the radius there. I think that has a really great look to it. But this is a third-party effect. It does cost, I believe, $50. You can find it on aescripts.com. I think it looks a fair bit better than the stock glow, but let's just stick with the stock glow for now. And I think this is looking pretty good so far. I like this. Now, one thing that I want to make sure is happening is that this stroke layer here, which I pulled down to the bottom, is going to be completely off. So actually, when it goes down to 0, I'm just going to trim it up so that I know that it's out and it's not going to be having any stuff or junk hanging over and messing with the overall width of my text. So this is looking cool. We can also turn on the motion blur. Oops, not the 3D switch. The motion blur for this stroke. I'm not sure that'll translate a tremendous amount. Yeah, I don't know. I might also be able to punch up this section here. What we might be able to do is kind of fake some more intense glowing by duplicating this outline layer here. I'll hit U and I'll go to where the stroke is being animated right here. And I want it to start a little smaller. In fact, I want this to be almost white like this. And so I want this to just kind of be kind of a white inner part here. In fact, I can probably go about that, maybe a stroke width of 4. And then I'm going to come to my effects console and I'm going to do a Gaussian blur. And I'm going to blur this out a little bit. And I think that should work. Maybe Maybe I'll bump this up a little bit more. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And I may be able to set this to like additive mode. Yeah, that I think looks cool. In that case, I'll pull that back down and then increase the blur a little bit more. And now it really kind of has a little bit more of a neon sort of effect to it. The thing that I want to make sure is that it completely disappears here. Yeah, okay, cool. So now let's check out how that looks in the mix here. And I think it may be just a little bit too much, so I might pull it down just a hair, because this glow right now I think is a little bit too intense. And I may want to adjust or animate the glow intensity and maybe punch it up right here. And then I'll pull it down just a little bit here. Maybe I'll just go one frame before then and then punch it in like this. Oh yes, I like that. Now overall, I think this has a pretty good look to it, but I think we could punch it up a little bit more with some lens flares. And you're gonna see that coming up in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're gonna pick up where we left off in the last lesson, working on this animation here, and we're gonna be checking out some lens flares. I don't know how you feel about lens flares, but if someone were to ask me, I would say, I love lens flares, and I really do. They're just the right thing when you need a little bit of flash and pizzazz to stuff like this. This kind of has almost a kind of retro future vibe here. And I really want to make this punch of the text here when we go from just the stroke and the fill comes in. And I'm just going to drop a marker here with the asterisk so I can figure out where that is. But when that fill punches in, I want some lens flares. I want to have this whole thing light up nice and bright. And I think the effect that it will have is that the text is much brighter than it actually is. So to accomplish this, I'm going to use a third-party effect called optical flares. This is by Video Copilot. It's probably one of the best lens flare plugins out there. So to apply optical flares, I'm going to create a solid. I'm just going to name this OF for optical flares. And then I will add optical flares to that. It's going to load in here. I'm going to set this to screen for now. Then I'm going to jump into the options and I'm going to customize my flare. Now, optical flares comes with some default flares, and then it has kind of a pro presets, and it's got a bunch of different preset packages that it comes with. I have all of them, and I think I want to use one that looks like either this Illuminati or something very long and stretchy. Ooh, Sub-Zero. Yeah, I like this one. This will be a good lens flare. Now, I like everything about the look of this except for this jazz right here, this angly stuff. And thankfully, I can come right down here and just hide any of the bits that I don't like. I like that. I like that. I don't like this blue thing here. So let me find where that is. There we go. That's it. And then I think that and that have to go as well. So this is really going to be a simple sort of lens flare. Cool. I'm also going to change the positioning mode to 3D, which will help it track, I think, a little better with the camera. And then I'm going to position it just on the edge of the frame here when this hits. And I will also trim up the beginning of the layer here with begin bracket so that lens flares start right here. And I'm going to animate the position. So when we come to rest here, basically what I'm going to do is just move this over and probably down just a little bit like that. And then I'm also going to animate the scale and the brightness. And I'm going to jack the scale way up and the brightness way up. And that's going to just look, whoa, it's going to look awesome. Maybe too much scale there. Maybe a little more brightness. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. I'll press U on the keyboard to bring up those keyframes, and maybe I'll go like to there, and I'll reset the brightness, reset the scale, maybe turn the brightness down a little more. Like that. Cool. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I like that. I think I'd probably take these, easy ease them, jump into the graph editor, and let's look at the speed graph, and then give it kind of a shape like this, where I want it to hit kind of an exponential curve. I want to fit this to the view here. There we go. Fit all graphs to view. Yeah, I want this to really hit, and then bam. See if I go to value graph, what does that do? There we go. That's looking all right. It's going to really look like a flash, essentially, if the curve is that exponential sort of shape. Bam. Now, Optical Flares also has a flicker section down here, and I'm going to change the type to sharp, and I'm going to turn up the speed and the amount, because I like flickery lens flares. Ooh, I like that. That may be a little bit too much. Maybe let's try smooth, and then I'll turn this down a little bit, the amount. You know what? I do like sharp. But maybe we'll just turn down the speed a little bit. Let's try that. Very cool. Ooh, you know what? Actually, I want my lens flare to stop moving right here, and I'll probably have to easy ease that. Because if it keeps moving once the camera stops, that's not going to look so hot. Very cool. Okay, I like that. I think the only thing that I would do in addition to this is maybe give the background a little bit of an RGB split look to it. I don't know. It might work, it might not. So I'm going to come to the background layer here. I'm going to right click on it and choose replace with pre-comp. And that's going to pre-comp my background layer. I'm going to double click that, go on into my background layer. Weirdly, it has this strange crop here, and that's fine. But I'm going to apply another third-party effect. This one is from Red Giant Universe, and that's called RGB Separation. Universe is a collection of all kinds of different, very useful effects for After Effects and Premiere. And one of them that I'm very fond of is this RGB split. Now, RGB split is this effect, and we'll kind of zoom in here so that you can see this. Let's see, RGB separation. If we just push it out just a little bit, it just kind of separates the red, blue, and green channels in space. And it has this really cool looking effect that I just love. I think it looks really neat. Now, they actually have a couple of different variations on this. So this is one of them. In fact, they have a preset browser here that will open up, and you can choose a bunch of different looks. So some things have a little bit of distortion. We have heavy. I think maybe subtle distortion might work. Let's try that. Yeah. So this is without. This is with. Okay, I can see that. I may just pull the radius in just a touch. Let's see what that looks like. Now you could, if you wanted, take this optical flares layer, duplicate it, jump into the position, and then just move this up here to duplicate the effect. And then, of course, we're going to have to change the end position here, maybe up here, something like that. Let's see what this looks like. Yes, oftentimes I like to have somewhat symmetrical lens flares. If there's one on the bottom, I think one on the top kind of works, but you know, it's up to you. I think it looks pretty cool. And if this is just a little bit too washed out, because I think that's adding just a little bit too much kind of wash there. You could add a curves effect to this and maybe just tighten that up a little bit. It's up to you. Or you can just turn down the brightness or the scale. Probably the scale would need to come down a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. Coming up in the next lesson, you're going to learn about a pro tip that will really help these lens flares and these fine gradations look great when you export. In this lesson, you're going to learn about a pro tip that will help your lens flares and gradations look fantastic when you export. Now, here's a bit of a pro tip, all right? We've been looking at this for a while. Right now, my project is in 16 bits per channel color depth. Now, the default in After Effects is 8 bits per channel. And you're thinking, okay, and what's your point? I'm following you, but why does it matter? Well, it matters because of banding. Anytime that you have gradients, and in particular lens flares, we just solo up these flares for a second here, what you will see, and this is going to be subtle because of the compression that will be done to this video, but you can see hopefully there is some banding going on in here. There we go. We're seeing it stronger here as the gradient gets less bright. And that is because in 8-bit per channel color mode, the red, the blue, the green, and the alpha channel only have 256 values to work with. And if this were a full kind of black to white gradient, we could come up with a pretty smooth gradient over the distance of, the corner to maybe the center of the screen, something like that. We could get a pretty good gradient there. However, as the gradient gets smaller in terms of its contrast, so instead of going from black in the middle to white at the edge, if we go from more of a light gray to more of a just slightly brighter gray, then we have a lot less colors in between these two to work with, and the result is banding, which is what you are seeing right now. The banding is not inherent in the plugin for optical flares. It's just the reality of working in 8-bit per channel color mode. Now, if you alt-click on this and you jump up to 16 bits per channel, what you'll see is this gets better, but still there is some banding. If we go to 32 bits per channel, you may also see a little bit of banding. It should be better, particularly against the background. However, 32 bits per channel is going to really screw up anything with glows on it. So let's go back to 16 bits per channel. And we'll zoom way in here and see if we can detect any banding. Now, sometimes you can't detect it with your eye, but when you go and compress this, you will see more banding because some of the color compression when you export your project is going to average the colors out. It's going to say, well, I know this is a gradient, but we need to save space here. So we got to throw away some of this color information. And so the banding comes back in because ultimately you'll probably be delivering this in an 8-bit codec of some sort. So I can see some banding right up here in the corner. I don't think you will be able to after this gets compressed, even in 16-bit per channel color depth. So the way to fix this, and I do this with almost all of my After Effects projects, and this is like super secret, top secret pro information, is with noise. It sounds crazy because in the world of cameras, we think of noise as being bad, right? You want a camera with less noise. However, noise is a magical thing. If you think about what's happening here with this gradation between the lights and the darks, and we'll go back to 8-bit mode so that you can hopefully see some of these banding artifacts even more, is if I take this adjustment layer that I just added and I drop a noise effect on it, and then I turn up the noise, at some point, that banding is going to go away. Now, that's too much noise for sure. But on top of all of the other layers, it may be enough to kill some of that banding. Plus, what we can do is we can kind of stack this noise effect. By we, I mean me. So instead of just adding it to the adjustment layer, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it to this layer right here. And I'm going to turn it way down maybe 1%. And I'll copy this and I'll add it to this other optical flares. Oops, that's down here. So now I have two little tiny grains, and you can see it. Like if I zoom way in, you should be able to see it. There's definitely noise there, right? If I click off one of these, you're going to see it reduce. However, if we're looking at 100%, you can just barely make it out. And by the time this gets compressed, you're not really going to see it. And then we add the top layer of grain on top of this, and I may add just like 2%. It's very, very small. And then here's the magic. In After Effects, we're going to go from 8-bit to 16-bit per channel. And check this out. There's no banding. Like even if we zoom way in, you can't see any banding. It's just gone. Now, there may be just the very slightest bit of banding there. And I'm being honest with you, I don't see it. However, when this gets compressed, you may be seeing some banding, but in real life, it's not there. And you're thinking, yeah, but this looks grainy. Well, look at it in context of everything. First of all, the noise, I think, looks cool. So there is that. I think it adds a nice grit and a sort of overall just blend to this, which I think looks really nice. Secondly, when this gets compressed, especially for the web, a lot of that noise will get sort of compressed out. All this little detail here, H.264 won't really handle that, especially if this is going to YouTube or something. This kind of individual, every pixel is different sort of look, a lot of that detail gets thrown away. And so adding noise can really help things. You could also add grain to this as well. So instead of noise, which is a very, very fine effect, so the noise is a very fine effect, and I'm going to turn it off these two layers here. You don't have to stack it either, because you can see that the banding is mostly gone with just this top level noise here. Sometimes I find it helpful to put just a tiny bit of noise on the optical flares layer, but you can see that it's pretty much gone here. I'm not seeing any banding right now. But another effect that can give it a nice overall look is the add grain effect. So right over here, we'll just pop in add grain. Now, if you think your computer is fast, go ahead and set this to final output. And then you may want to turn down the intensity to something like 0.5. Yeah, just 0.5 for intensity, which is a nice effect, maybe even 0.3 or something like that. This is applying a nice grain effect, and you can see the noise is off right now, and it is adding a little bit of something. In fact, I'm going to jack this up to 0.6 so that you can see it more once this gets compressed. But watch how long this takes to render just one frame. Okay, it looks like it's going actually pretty fast. Let me put this at 100%. You're saying, well, yeah, it's going, but consider that the machine that I'm running this on is a 16-core AMD Ryzen 3950X with 128 gigs of RAM. This is not a slouch computer. But if you're trying to use add grain on any slower computer, maybe a laptop, it's going to put a real hurt on your laptop. So if you like the look of this add grain effect, a better way and a faster way to use it is actually to pre-render it. And I want to show you that right now. I'm going to create a new composition. I'm going to name it grain. I'm going to make it 1920 by 1080, 29.97 frames per second, 5 seconds long. Click OK. I'm going to add a gray solid to this, and I want to make sure that it has no hue, no saturation. It's 50% gray, and I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to add the grain effect and set it to final output. And that's it. For me, I like the look of this grain. It does look a little soft, but if I want more high frequency, finer detail in the noise texture, I can just use the noise effect. So this works fine. I'm going to add that to the render queue, queue that up, and there it is right there. I'm going to use the GoPro Cineform YUV 10-bit preset. One of the Apple ProRes presets would also work, and I'm just going to render that out. Now, I've already rendered that out, so I'm going to double-click in my project panel to import that. Switch back over to my outer space scene, and I'm going to pull that down into my composition here. Now, right away you can see that it doesn't look the same, and that's because I need to apply a blending mode to this. The two blending modes that work really well with grain, at least for me, is overlay and linear light. Linear light looks super aggressive. However, if you just turn down the opacity, it works pretty well. It is a little bit sort of gritty looking. That can work sometimes. Overlay is a nice alternative. It's a little more subtle, and you're going to have to jack up the opacity to be able to see it. But, you can see even at 100% opacity, it is pretty subtle. Final thing that you may have noticed is that this grain clip is too short. Now, if I was using this grain clip in Premiere, what I would do is just make a sequence and then just copy and paste this like 50 or 60 or 80 or 100 times to be as long as I needed this grain clip. And then I can use that subsequence as a layer and set that to a blending mode to work in Premiere. However, in After Effects, there's a much easier solution. I'll just take this layer right here, hit Control-Alt-T on the keyboard, or you can right-click and come up here to Time and choose Enable Time Remapping. Once you've enabled time remapping, I'm going to apply a very simple expression. I'm going to Alt-click on the time remap and type loop, and it's going to prompt me right here. I want loop out. So there we go. And then I'm going to put cycle in quotes. And again, if I type quotes, it's going to prompt me, and I want to choose cycle. So this is the expression, loop out, cycle in quotes. If you just click away there, we can extend the out point of this layer, and it's going to loop indefinitely. I'll just turn the opacity up here and play the grain, and you can see exactly what it's going to do. It's just going to loop. And you can use this loop out cycle expression on a bunch of different properties. It's a good one to know. Pull this back down. Now it renders, and it's moving much faster than it did before with that add grain effect. I think that looks fantastic. Coming up in the next several lessons, we're going to be looking at a much more complicated animation, working with another design, using more expressions, learning some new expressions like the wiggle expression, keyframe animation, and more. Coming up in the next few lessons, you're going to learn how to take some static art here created by a designer in Adobe Illustrator, break it apart, prep it for animation, and create something much more dynamic. All right, so we're looking at art that was created in Illustrator by a designer. It's not yet ready for animation. Similar to another lesson in the course where we looked at a burger design, we're going to have to prep this art for animation. So the first thing that I like to do is come over here to the Layers panel, and in the little flyout menu here, just come down here to Release to Layers, and that's going to put all of the individual elements on their own layers. You can see if I undo that. Previously, you can see the layer colors are all the same, and that means if I were to import this into After Effects, this would be just one flat layer. Now, I could rebuild it in After Effects, but it's going to save me a little bit of time if I go here and Release to Layers. Oops, let me select that layer. Release to Layers. I'm going to select all these layers, pull them down, and kind of put them in their own root directory, and delete that top layer there. And then I'm going to name these. So I'm just going to toggle on the layer visibility, double click to rename, and I'll name this top one text. And this looks like leaves and lines. And if we drill down here, well, let's deal with that in a second. I think this bottom layer here is just the background. So on this middle layer, we have all kinds of junk. We have these individual leaf elements here, which if you look very closely, you can see that these are a TIFF. So these are a flat layer, and that's not going to be ideal for what we're going to do in After Effects, but we'll deal with that in a second here. So let's see if we can isolate some of these lines here. I think what we can do is select this layer here and then come down to Release Layers to Sequence. Yep, that'll work. Perfect. And then we can take all of these layers here and pull them down, or maybe pull them up above this layer. Very good. And then we'll just get rid of this right here. That'll work. And let's figure out what is on each of these layers. Okay, so these two are lines. So we'll call this one line underscore 1 maybe. And this line underscore 2. That layer is nothing. It's got some kind of rectangle in it. I don't think it's anything, so I'm just going to delete it. And before we go any further, I'm actually going to just save this as a unique name so that I don't inadvertently mess up the original artwork. Each one of these are the leaves, so I'll just name those. Leaves 1. Good enough. And I will save this. Now this is pretty good to go as it is. If I were to import this in After Effects, I'll have access to the text and the leaves and the lines in the background, and I could do something with that. However, what I would like to do is animate the individual leaf elements here individually. I asked the designer where they got these leaf elements, and it happened to be from Envato Elements, which is, by the way, where this font came from as well. And so I have a collection of Photoshop files here, and in the Photoshop files are the individual leaf elements. So what I need to do is open up one of these and figure out what leaf elements I need, and then export those so that I can kind of rebuild just the leaf elements in After Effects. I think that's going to be pretty cool. So maybe I'll open up this one that says leafs.psd. That could be the one that I'm looking for. And let's see here. What are we looking at? Okay, so if I just show hide some of these layers. Okay, cool. So this right here is one of the elements that I need. And I think what I can do is with this layer selected, you can see that this is a smart object. And so it is linked to some other external graphic. And if you double click this, this will actually open up in Illustrator, which is a double bonus because this element is a vector file, which is very good. And so what I want to do is find the individual leaf layers that I need. There's the second one there. Let's see, I'll double click that. That'll open up in Illustrator. I'll come back to Illustrator in a second here so I can export all of those individually. There's another leaf element that I need. Very good. And how about this one right here? Cool, I think that's the fourth one. Let me just increase the opacity. Yeah, that looks right. Okay, so I think there's only 4 leaf elements in here. There's one that's repeated twice, that kind of very light looking leaf element. So I have basically everything that I need right now. The only thing that I need to do is maybe just crop these in a little bit to make them easier to work with. If I save them just like this, the artboard is going to be quite large in After Effects, and that could be annoying. So I'm just going to grab the artboard tool here, which is also the keyboard shortcut Shift-O. And I'm just going to crop in on these elements here. I may give them just a little bit of wiggle room on the sides, something like that. And then I will save all of these individually. So I'll switch back to the selection tool here. And I've actually already gone ahead and done this. So I've named them leaf 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I've saved them right here, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that, but it's basically the same thing for all of these other layers. I just take the artboard and shrink it down and then export it as an Illustrator file and name it appropriately. All right, so let's just kind of review here. Taken the artwork, I've released them to layers, tried to figure out what was what, and named all of the layers. And so now everything is on its own layer, and I've saved that. And that right there is a good place to stop for this lesson. If you've been following along, congratulations. Now I know I went pretty fast through a lot of those steps in Illustrator and Photoshop. So if you need another go at it, if you need a little bit more time, go ahead and rewind the video and pause it where you need to so that you can catch up. The next step of the process is to pull all of these things into After Effects so we can begin the process of animating this design. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to pull all of these things into After Effects so we can begin the process of animating this design. Okay, I'm over in After Effects here. First thing that we'll do is I will save this here, and I believe this is my Boutque kind of artwork. All right, now I'm going to import my graphics here, and I'm going to import my How to Animate in After Effects Boutque scene _1. That was the one that I saved with all the individual layers. Click import, and I want to import it as a composition, and I'm going to keep the footage dimension set to layer size. All right, if I double click to open that up, hey, check that out. It's looking fantastic. I have my lines here, my leaves, my text. Everything's looking pretty good. The only thing that I need is those individual leaf elements. So I'm going to double click to open up those, jump into my leaf folder here. And actually, I think I can just grab this and say import folder. Perfect. And now I have my individual leaf layers. So now what I might do is take these leaf layers here and just kind of lay them out and try to match them up with what I'm seeing here. And it looks like some of these have been flipped in one dimension or another. I'm just going to reverse the X dimension there by putting a negative or a minus sign in front of the X scale, which will flip it in the horizontal. I can just lock those back together there, and I'll just kind of rotate it around to figure out, yeah, okay. So that kind of goes right there. Kind of shrink that down and move that around until it's about the same size. How exact you want to go with this really depends on what you're doing. If this is client work, you're going to really want to make sure that it's very, very precise, but I think that'll actually work fine for now. I'm going to change the color on this leaf here to red. I'm going to duplicate it, Control D on the keyboard, and I'm going to rotate it around and try and align it here with this leaf. Very good. That's close enough. All right, let's check out this third leaf here. This also looks like it's been, oh, no. Okay, that goes over here, actually. And is that in the right orientation? It is not. So I'm going to jump into the scale, and I'm going to flip the scale again, like that. Rotate that around. Yes, that looks correct. I'm going to have to increase the scale on this. No big deal. And I can just enable the continuously rasterize button there, and that'll ensure that I can scale this up to ridiculous proportions and it won't lose any of that delicious detail that is in this Illustrator file here. So now it's just a matter of just kind of aligning this. Sometimes it can be easier to align these if you can see where the end is here. If you hit Y and just put the anchor point on the end of the leaf, and then you can just kind of align it here. And that way, when you scale, it's going to scale right from that point. And it's going to be super easy to get that aligned. Perfect, just like that. All right, now we have this third element here. And that looks like this one right here. Again, I'm just going to throw the anchor point right on the end of the leaf, just like that. Enable continuously rasterize. Oops, I didn't get that exactly where I wanted it. Very good. Scale that up. It looks like all of these have actually been flipped in one of the dimensions for one reason or another. And we'll just kind of align that. Looks like it starts right here. Very good. And just scale that up. Rotate it around. Maybe push it back down a little bit. There we go. Perfect. And then what is the final leaf that we have here? Okay. Yes, it's this guy right here. And I don't really know how this is oriented, but let's see if we can figure this out here. Is it like this? No, it actually looks like this is flipped as well. Let me constrain those so it doesn't get all crazy. There we go. And then I will also continuously rasterize that. Make sure that's looking good. Sometimes if you grab a handle, one of the transform handles on the corner, and you try and scale it, it will do like a weird thing. Once you move the mouse kind of over in this direction, it'll flip the scale. So if you hold shift while you're scaling with one of these 4 transform handles, it'll go a lot easier. Okay, that is great. I'm going to change the label to red on all of these. And the final thing that I'm going to do is just adjust the stacking order. So it looks like 1, 2, 3, and then those are in the bottom orientation. And I've re-enabled those and just forgot. Okay, so it's the roundy leaf, and I'll just disable these leaves so I can see. Okay, oh, it looks like I've done it kind of inadvertently. Well, so that was very good. I guess the final thing I need to do is just adjust the opacity, perhaps on these layers right here. And then I'll just enable one of these other leaves here just for reference. Let's see. Cool. I think that looks really pretty close. All right, that's about it for this lesson. So coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at how to duplicate these, and then we're going to start to animate them in a really fun way. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, we're going to pick up right where we left off in the last lesson, continue to build out this layout here in After Effects, and start animating these leaves in a fun and interesting way. Okay, in the last lesson, we sorted out the artwork side of this animation and brought it into After Effects. And now we have these leaf elements here, or these leaf elements, if you will, all broken out into individual elements. And I like that a lot better because now what I can do is animate them. And I think what I'd like to do is do like a very subtle kind of rotation on them to make them look like they're kind of blowing in the wind. Before I do that, though, I'm going to continue just finishing out this layout here. And I'm going to basically duplicate these leaves and replace the other flat leaf elements here. Before I do, I'm just going to solo up all of my leaf layers here and make sure that I have the anchor points positioned where I want them for rotation. So I want the anchor point to be right there. So when it rotates, it does sort of that thing like that. Okay, very good. Let's look at the next leaf here, and we'll just put the anchor point about there. And how about that? That's good. That's good. And I'm pretty sure that's good as well. Fantastic. Great. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click down in the sequence window here, and I'm going to do New, and I'm going to add a null object. You can also come up to Layer, New, Null Object, or use the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-Shift-Y. So I'm going to take my null, and I'm going to drag it over here and just kind of snap it to the corner. Now, if you don't have snapping enabled when you have the selection tool selected, can enable it right here with this checkbox, but you can also temporarily enable it or reverse the enabling by holding Control. So if it is enabled when you hold Control, it will disable, and if it's not enabled when you hold Control, it will enable. If that doesn't make sense, you can see right now it's not snapping because I don't have Control held, but watch when I hold Control, it's going to want to snap. So I want to snap this to the corner because as you see, these other leaf elements here are kind of positioned relative to the corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this leaf 1 or maybe leaf control 1. Very good. And before I duplicate this, I think what I want to do is I want to animate it, because if I'm kind of thinking ahead, which is hard sometimes when you're building out animations, I know that I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to move it around my composition to basically replace these other flat leaf elements here, right? And if I do the animation first, that'll save me some steps down the line. And I just noticed, I think I need to increase the opacity here. I think in the last lesson when I was adjusting the opacity, it was actually over the leaf layer underneath them. So back to animating. What I want to do is I want to have these kind of spring into action here, or spring up and grow. And then I want to have them kind of wave in the wind by animating the rotation. So there's two kind of intermediate / advanced concepts here that I want to show you. One is this idea of animating with an expression. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit S on the keyboard. I'm going to bring up the scale property. I'm going to go maybe 10 frames. So I hit Shift page down and I just went 10 frames forward, and I'm going to drop a scale keyframe. So this is going to be the end scale for this particular leaf element. And I'll just zoom up on that so you can see, right? Then I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to set this to 0. So over the first 10 frames, we're going to go from here to there. Not very interesting at all. What I'd like to do is enhance that with something called inertial bounce. This is also known as kind of overshoot, if you will, but it's a great technique that will give this some kind of realistic looking life to it. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, let's just do a quick Google search for inertial bounce After Effects. And if you go to just pick the first selection that's going to come up, it's going to be probably graymachine.com/top 5 After Effects expressions. And you'll find this expression all over the internet. What we want to do is copy this right here under inertial bounce version 1.2. Copy this expression right here. So we'll just copy that. We'll jump back to After Effects. We are going to alt-click on the stopwatch, which will allow us to paste an expression in here. And just by doing that little bit of copying and pasting, now check out what we have with our animation. This is something much more dynamic. So it's doing this kind of overshoot calculation, if you will. And I can actually show you that if I jump into the graph editor here and we turn on the post expression graph. So this is showing you what the graph is doing here after the expression has been applied. So we see we have this initial leaf scale animation here. And then once it ends, so once we get to this point right here, the expression is doing kind of an overshoot. So we go past our scale and we go up and then it swings down and we get this sinusoidal wave with a decay in the amplitude, which is the height of the wave here. And it has a very natural look to it because this is essentially how a lot of things operate in the real world, which is very cool. Now, if you don't like the exact movement that we're getting here, we can modify some of these parameters here. And we can type in, I wouldn't mess with the amplitude too much, but a lot of times I take the frequency, the default frequency of 2, and I knock that down to 1.5 because I think 2 is just a little too much and I don't really like it. So I prefer to see it around 1.5. If the overshoot animation or expression is lasting too long, and I think it is, what we can do is turn up the decay, and this will cause it to, well, decay faster. It'll cause that post expression to stop more quickly. So let's just turn this up to 6 and then hit enter on the number pad there. And you see now we get a little bit of overshoot, but it dies very quickly. And if we look at the graph editor, that's going to reflect that. So we just get a little bit of overshoot, we get a little bit of bounce back, and then it settles very, very quickly compared to where it was before. This is going a lot longer. So this is all personal preference. I think I like it somewhere around 5, but to kind of get a more uniform look for all of these, rather than tweaking every single leaf, what we can do is just think ahead a little bit, and I'm going to add some slider controls to my leaf controller layer here. So with my leaf controller selected, I'm going to come over to the effects and presets, type in slider control, and I'm going to grab a slider. I'm going to call this freak for frequency. I'm going to duplicate it, Control D, and I'm going to call this decay. I don't really need to mess with the amplitude. These controls should be fine. So in the expression, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 1.5, and then I'm going to grab the pick whip, and I'm going to pick whip up to frequency. And then I'm going to grab the decay. I'm just going to select that 5 there, and I'm going to use the pick whip and pick whip up to decay. And if I run it back now, it's not going to do anything because both of these values are set to 0, and that's no good. So I'm going to set the first one to 1.5 and this to 5. That way, if I want to globally kind of change that, I don't have to run back through all of these expressions, which is going to be quite a few, especially when we duplicate all 5 of these leaves. That's going to be 20 different layers we're going to have to go through. So this is going to be a lot quicker. So now what I can do is I can grab that scale expression. So let me bring that up and I'll hit S. And I'm also going to toggle the post expression here from the graph editor so that I don't see that. And I'm just going to copy these. Actually, I can't do that. I was going to copy the keyframes, but that's not going to work because if I bring up the scale properties on all of these layers, all the scales are actually different. So I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to select just these 4 layers. I'm going to drop a scale keyframe right here, come back to the beginning and set all of them to 0. Then on my leaf number 4 here, the second copy of this, I'm just going to right click and choose copy expression only. You can just see that on the bottom of the screen there. I'll just bring this up and show you one more time. Copy expression only. And now if I just select these keyframes here and I hit paste, it's not going to paste the keyframes. It's going to paste the expression to the scale properties. And so now all of them should grow and do that very nice overshoot animation there. Now, if you want to get a little bit more life out of this, what we could do is you can change the distance between the keyframes. So if we shorten this, we're going to get it's going to be quicker and we're going to get a more drastic kind of overshoot there. But we can also kind of smooth out the beginning here by just selecting these keyframes and hitting F9. That's also going to give it a slightly different look. Now, having them all come out at the same time doesn't really look too hot. So what I would probably do is offset these by maybe a frame or so, like this, so that they kind of come out in a staggered way there, which you won't really be able to see at the start of the animation, but you'll see it at the end of the animation when they're all kind of moving in that what seems to be a random way, which is not random at all. But it has a nicer look to it, and that's great. This inertial bounce expression can be used in a bunch of fun in different ways. You can use it on scale, rotation, position, and a bunch of other properties to come up with some really interesting looks. Now, coming up in the next lesson, you're going to learn about the wiggle expression, and that's going to help to create this really nice, subtle leaf blowing in the wind effect. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, we're going to pick it up right where we left off in the last lesson, and you're going to learn about a really useful expression called wiggle. The final thing that I want to do with these leaves is I want to give them some wiggle in the rotation property here. So rather than keyframe the animation, which we could do, and that would give us, well, a ton of control, it's going to be very tedious to do that on many layers and get a unique look. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert another expression, and this is not going to have any keyframes on it. So I'm going to Alt-click on the rotation stopwatch. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to type wiggle, and you can see if you're running After Effects 2020, and I believe 2019 it does this, it's going to prompt you. And so with the wiggle expression, we need the word wiggle, and then we need something inside parentheses. So if we start and we put a parentheses in here, it's going to add the end parentheses. And we need 2 things at the very least. We need a frequency and we need an amplitude. And these are 2 properties separated by a comma. So let's just type in some numbers. So let's do a frequency of 10, and then we're going to put a comma, and then we need an amplitude. And this is going to be the amount that the rotation is going to move. So 10 is going to be the frequency. That's going to be 10 times a second, which if you're thinking about that, it's going to be way too much, but I want to show you kind of an over-exaggeration. And then we need an amount. So let's just type in 30, and then let's press Enter on the numeric keyboard. I'm going to solo this layer so you can see exactly what that's going to do. Wow, if it was blowing this much in the wind, I'd say we have a major problem and you need to get indoors, probably in a hurricane or tornado shelter. But you can see basically what it's doing. And in fact, we can jump into the post expression graph here and look. So over time, without doing any keyframes, this property is basically animating itself. And this is what wiggle does, and it does a great job of it. However, it's doing it way too much, right? This is way too fast. So we need something much more subtle. Maybe something like 0.5, and then, I don't know, maybe 5 degrees of wiggle. And if we look at that, I think that's going to be about right. However, just like before, what I want to do is I want to think ahead. So once I see this whole thing built, if I want to go back and adjust the wiggle on all 20 of these layers, that's going to be very tedious because I'm going to have to jump back into the rotation property and jump into the expression and then update these numbers. And well, that's not so fun. I'm going to come up to my leaf controller here, and I'm going to put in another slider control. And I'm going to call this wiggle frequency. Duplicate that, and then I'll just change this to wiggle amplitude. And then down here in my wiggle expression, I'm going to select 0.5, and I'm going to pick whip up to frequency, and I'll set this to 0.5. Now I'm going to select just the 5 here, and I'm going to pick whip up to the amplitude. And I think that looks correct. Let me hit enter here. Okay, it's giving me an error, and I'm pretty sure that's because I need another parentheses in there. I don't know why it does something. I had only the 5 selected, but the expression needs to live inside parentheses. And when you pick whip to something over here, this last slider name is in parentheses, and so it needs another parentheses to basically close this out. You can see when I put the cursor right here, it selects this ending parentheses. Is it parens? I don't know what the singular of parentheses is. Someone can correct me, and that's fine. But you can see that the corresponding open parentheses here to this closed parentheses is at the beginning of all of this junk here. So it's wiggle open parentheses, then we need the frequency, which is linked to the wiggle frequency slider here. And then we need the amplitude, which is after the comma. So boom, there's our comma. And then we have the code here, this comp dot layer, and then the layer name and the effect, and then dot wiggle amplitude, and then slider. And we need that ending parentheses. So once we have that, we're all good to go. We can type 5 here, and now we're good to go. Check this out. And if we want more wiggle, no problem. We can just change this to like 0.7 or something, and now it'll wiggle faster. Or we can put this to 15, and now it's going to go more. Very, very easy to modify. The last thing that we need to do is copy the expression on the rotation, bring up the rotation on these other leaf layers here, select all of them, and then paste them in. All right, so now we should see a really nice animation. Now, I did turn those values up too high, but the nice thing about the wiggle expression, you would think, well, you pasted the same exact code here. Why are they all doing something different? Well, the wiggle expression has some quasi-random variation to it. And if you apply the same frequency and amplitude to two different things, they're going to have a different animation because there's some random sort of values that are happening there. We get a nice kind of random blowing in the wind effect here. It's very cool. So that about does it for this lesson. In the next few lessons, we're going to be looking at duplicating these leaves. We're going to do a really cool write-on effect for this text and animate all of the other elements here, and it's going to look great. So check those out coming up next. In this lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last lesson, duplicate some layers and relink expressions. If you've been following along in the previous lesson, we've done some really cool things. We've done an inertial bounce for the scale. We've done a cool wiggle expression. We've linked that all to a leaf controller here so that when we duplicate this, it's going to do a lot of the animation heavy lifting for us. And we don't have to do a lot of keyframe animation. In fact, it's very little keyframe animation. So the next step in the process here is I want to link all of these layers to my control leaf layer here, my leaf control layer, so that I can move them all together. Once they are all linked, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 6 of these layers and I'm going to duplicate them. And then I'm going to hit Control end bracket to bring them to the top of the layer stack. And I'm going to change the color of all of these so I can keep track of them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select my leaf controller layer here. And I'm going to, I think, rotate that around. And that's going to go in the bottom corner here. And I'll just turn on the other leaf layers to just make sure, yep, that is correct. And I'll turn those off. Cool. And again, I'm going to grab these and I'm going to duplicate them, hit Control End bracket to bring them to the top of the layer stack. And I'm going to change the color here to aqua. I'm going to select only the leaf controller 3 here. And then I'm going to maybe rotate them down like this. And I think to match the original, I might need to flip the dimension on these. Let's see if I enable my leaf layers here. Yeah. So on this one right here, I'm going to just take the X dimension and I'm going to flip that and then rotate it back around, and that should line up. Perfect. Great. And then I'm going to take this layer right here, duplicate it. Again, Control End bracket, change the label here. Let's do green. Going to select only the leaf controller here, bring it down to here, snap that, and then rotate that into position. So these two here that are in the upper right-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner needed to be flipped to match the orientation of the other leaves. You can choose to do that, or you can just leave them how they are. Now, I don't need these leaf reference layers in here anymore, so I'm going to get rid of them. And let's check out what we have so far. Ooh, very nice. Look at this. That's looking really quite nice. Now, the one final thing that we need to check here is that everything is being linked up correctly. Sometimes when you duplicate things, the expressions no longer link properly. And so there's just a small little thing that we need to do here to change that. So if you look at my leaf controller 2 here, we need to just go through in the expression and change this to 2 for the leaf controller, because currently it is being linked to the first leaf controller. Now, does that really matter? I don't think it does. You could have all of these controlled with one leaf controller, kind of a master leaf controller, if you will. But if you want individual control over all of your layers, you're just going to have to go through and update just a few of these here, and it should just take you just a second. So on all of these leaf layers right here, we're just going to have to update. If you hit UU, and it's actually easier if you hit tilde with your sequence selected here, and then I'll just bring that up here. And you can just go through, and anytime you see leaf control 1, just change that to 2. And then the same thing right here. Boom, 2. And then 2. 2, and then 2. And so now, if I wanted to make an adjustment on the decay of these leaves, maybe just turn it down a little bit or change the wiggle parameter just a little bit. Maybe I want it to be 0.55 or something like that. I can, and I can get individual control on all of those layers. Like I mentioned before, for this particular animation, I don't think relinking is 100% necessary. However, it's a good thing to know because for some of your animations that you will build, if you have properties that are linked in some of the duplicated layers and they don't relink, that's going to present a problem. So you're going to need to know how to resolve that issue. Thankfully, this very tedious and annoying task can be made much easier with the use of a third-party script, like so many things in After Effects. If you go to aescripts.com, you can find a script called Duplicate Layers in Update Expressions. And this will take out a lot of the work that I just showed you how to do manually when you duplicate the layers. But it's good to know how to do it manually as well. Now, coming up in the next lesson, you're going to learn how to do the write-on technique that's used all over motion graphics. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, you're going to pick up right where we left off in the last lesson, and you're going to learn about the write-on technique. So to get started, I'm going to jump down here, find my text layer, it's right here, and I'm going to pre-compose this. So I'm going to right-click on it and choose pre-compose. I'm going to leave all the attributes. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-C. I'm going to double click that text pre-comp to open it up here. And you may have noticed that this layer here looks a little bit different than the Illustrator layer over here. The end of the E is just a little bit funky. I'm not 100% sure why that is. I think that has to do with some of the character properties that are available in Illustrator that may not be available in After Effects. For whatever reason, it looks just slightly different. So if you wanted to, what you could do, we could just grab this E character here, jump back into After Effects, grab the text tool and paste that E, and that should line up very, very closely with this E right here. In fact, sometimes what I like to do is just change the color to some, well, more different color, and then align this up with this layer, just like that. I'll change it back to the text color here, and then make my comp just a little bit wider. I'm just going to hit Control K on the keyboard, go over to the Advanced tab, and select the arrow so that it grows out to the right here, and maybe add just, I don't know, 20 more pixels to this so that I get this little bit hanging off the end here. And then I can just put a mask on this bottom Illustrator layer right here to just mask out the E that I don't want. And if you hold the S key while you're creating the mask, it will select the subtract mask mode, which is what I want. I wanted to remove the E from the original here. And just like that, now I have that line back there. Perfect. So I'm going to actually pre-compose these, and I'm going to call this text fixed. There we go. And that's going to very slightly change the alignment here, but no big deal. I'll just move it back a couple of pixels, and that should be fine. So let's talk about how to do the text write-on effect. It's actually quite easy. So I'm going to deselect down here in my sequence panel, and I'm going to come up and grab the pen tool. And if I start clicking and dragging to create a shape in my composition here, it's going to create a shape layer, which is what I want. But before it does that, I'm just going to change some of the properties here. So I don't need any fill, and I'm just going to give it a nominal sort of stroke width. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where I would start if I were to draw this cursive text out. And I'm going to trace this. So I'm going to put a point right here, and I'm going to click and drag down here and just make some lines here. And the idea is I want my shape layer, I want my shape layer to completely cover my text layer, but only just barely. It's very easy to cover if you just jack up the stroke to an absurd amount, but I really want it to be just barely there, covering it, because that's going to give me the best result. And the idea is I essentially want to put this stroke here dead center in the text. So you could actually make this without a stroke. I like to do it with a stroke, and then I can kind of see how it's working here. And I'll just get it a little bit of the way, and then I'll adjust the stroke to a value that just barely covers the text. And I think I was actually pretty close before. I think that ought to do it. That's pretty darn close. We can go back and refine this, but I'm just going to pick it up here, and I'm going to keep going, creating my line here. Now, this is a bit of a tedious process. There isn't really a faster way to do this. This is pretty labor intensive, but it's not tremendously difficult. I think the key to getting a very convincing looking write-on effect is to draw the line how you would go about drawing this with a pen. So you're going to move along in the same direction that you would and take all of the same strokes. For instance, when we get to this T here, you wouldn't draw this T in real life by coming up here and stopping halfway and then doing the cross mark. No, we'd hit that at the end of the word, which is what I'm going to do here. Now, sometimes when you get a break in the text here, what you can do is you can create a new shape if you want to, or you can just kind of scoot the line up very quickly and then join it to the next letter. You want to kind of do it at an angle so that it starts at the top and it doesn't kind of jump in at the middle of the line there. And we'll just continue on tracing just like this. There we go. I am actually going to make a second shape here to get the T, the cross in the T, just like that, and to get this I. So I'm going to make a third shape, I guess, to get the dot of the I here, just like that. And then you want to order these, if you drill down in the layer under contents, so that they go top to bottom, 1, 2, 3, or however many shape layers that you use. Because the next step of this process is we are going to put a trim paths. So if you select contents and not any one of these individual shapes, you come over here to add, and we're going to put a trim paths on here. And we're going to animate the end position, but we want to set this not too simultaneously, but individually. And that's going to write them in order, which is correct. And finally, what we want to do is we want to change, and by we, I mean you, if you're following along, you're going to want to change the stroke line cap and maybe the stroke line join. And you want to change that to round cap and round join. And so that's going to put a roundy bit here where this joins, and that's going to make that look much nicer. So the end cap here, or the line cap, is actually this end bit. So let me change that back to butt so you can see. And I want this to actually stroke with a round cap, which is it's gonna look a little bit nicer. And so now once that's done, we can just kind of look over and make any small adjustments that we might need. I actually might take my whole comp here and just give it a little bit more width, maybe, I don't know, 1040, and maybe just a little bit more height, maybe 540. And that shouldn't really change the alignment in the master comp where this lives. Okay. So let me see if I can just dial this in a little bit. Okay, I think that looks good enough. So now what you want to do is actually go ahead and animate this on. So if you come down here to your trim paths and you go maybe, let's say 3 seconds, somewhere around the 3-second mark here, and we drop an end keyframe, and that's set to 100%, and then we'll go back to the beginning and we'll set this to 0. And so now when we play this, you can see, ooh, look at what we have here. Very nice. It doesn't look great if you're looking at the stroke. However, if you change this to alpha matte on the text fixed comp, now what you see is we get this very nice write-on effect here. Now it doesn't look perfect. There are some kind of strange things going on. Probably the first thing that you want to address here is the timing of this. So I'm going to scooch this down to 2 seconds. I'm going to see what that looks like here. Okay, that looks pretty decent. I'm also going to ease these keyframes here, and I'm going to jump over to the Motion 3 script utility that I've used in some previous lessons, just to give this just a little bit more kind of easing on those keyframes. So let's check that out now. Very nice. So I get this kind of, it starts a little bit slower. It kind of rips through the beginning or the middle, and then it slows down towards the end. I like that. I think that looks pretty good. And I like the timing of that too. I think that works pretty well. Now, the real trick of this is that as this is drawing on, and it looks pretty good right now. However, what you'll see is that part of the letters kind of get drawn on in a weird way, which they shouldn't be. So when the top kind of first part of this stroke comes down here, we're getting bits of the B here because this stroke width of the original text is not a fixed value. And there's no great way to kind of emulate that. It would be far too tedious to go through and create a bunch of different strokes at different lengths and then link them all up. That's crazy. The easy way to do that is to just come along here, and as it's animating on, you just kind of follow it. And every time there's a little bit that sticks out here, what you're going to do is you're going to take the pen tool, and with your text fixed layer selected, you're going to create a little mask. And as you're closing it up, just hit the S key, and that'll change that to subtract. And so now if you click away and you've drawn your mask relatively in the right spot, essentially what you want to do is mask out all of the bits that you don't want to see. And we really only need to address this mask here when this line comes back and crosses over it. So it's going to be right here. So at this point, what you would want to do is you jump into your masks and you set a keyframe for this mask, and then you go one frame forward. You take this mask, you can just double click it and just move it away. And when this plays back, you won't even see that. It just sort of appears. And so anytime you have a little kind of weirdness in the alpha track mat here, so this bit right here sticks out, you go to the frame right where it is getting occluded, if you will. So this is the frame where we want our little mask to move. We'll just go one frame before there, grab the pen tool, select the layer. I'm going to create that same sort of mask shape again. I'll hold S to make that a subtract mask there. Sometimes what I like to do is take this point here and just smooth that out just a little bit. And then as long as you're working on that mask, you can hit Control-Shift-M, and that'll drop a keyframe right there. You go one frame forward, so that's page down on the keyboard. I'll double-click this mask, and we'll just move it up a little bit. And so now when this part plays, I'll deselect so you can see, you won't even see that. You can't even see it moving. And so it's a very seamless way, and this is in fact the fastest way to do this right-on technique to have it look essentially flawless. And I'll just do the rest, and I'll play it and fast forward. You can see, and I'll be back in a second. I think that's just about perfect. Cool. Now, if you wanted to use something like a motion blur for this, you will have wanted to have turned that on before you've done those masks, because that will kind of alter where the masks are, because the motion blur will kind of project ahead a little bit. I think for the most part, most of those masks work just fine. If there are any kind of weird little things in there, you're not going to be able to see it when it's going that fast. Let's see how that looks in the main composition here. Ooh, that's already gorgeous looking. I really like it. I have one more lesson where we're going to kind of finish off this animation. We're going to do kind of a line animation here and kind of draw things in and bring it all together. So check that out coming up next. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to put some final touches on this animation and bring it all together. So let's check out one more time what we have here. I think this is awesome looking. The way that the leaves come on and they kind of move very subtly, that's looking great. I love the right-on effect. It's just elegant looking. One thing that I'm going to do to clean up my composition here is I'm going to select my leaf layers and I'm going to hit the shy switch on them. And then I'm going to hit the shy guy up here and just hide them, because I don't really need to see all of those. It's not deleting them, it's just hiding them. You can see it kind of changes the way the interface looks. We have kind of this thicker line right in this region right here. And that's letting me know that there's something hidden between these layers. If I want to bring them back, I can just hit the shy guy again, or the shy switch, and they'll all appear. But this makes it a little bit cleaner to work in. So there are a few final touches that I want to add. One is I want to animate on these lines. And right now they are an Illustrator file in here. But I think if we right click on these and choose create and create shapes from vector, they'll just be transformed into a shape layer. And what's nice about that is we can dive into this lines to outlines layer, and I'll just rename that, and add a trim path and set a keyframe here for the end, maybe somewhere around, I don't know, maybe 2.5 seconds, something like that. We'll go back to the beginning, set this to 0. So I'm going to select line 1, and I'm going to do the same thing. Right click, choose create shapes from vector layer. And I don't need these anymore, so I'm going to get rid of those. And then I can essentially just take this trim paths and paste it over here. Let's just see where that pasted in. Great, it's right there. And I think that's fine. just going to rename this. It's just kind of a personal pet peeve of mine that when you create a shape layer from an Illustrator file, it puts the outlines tag on the end of the layer, and that drives me nuts. I do not like to see that. So I like to rename my layers there. You can do that or not, no big deal. I'm going to select my 2 line layers here, press U on the keyboard, and I'm going to select my keyframes. I'm just going to hit F9 on the keyboard. I'm going to jump into the graph editor here, and I'm just going to give these a little bit of a curve, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. In fact, let's just solo the bottom 3 layers, so the 2 line layers and the background layers, so we can see what this is looking like. Okay. Not too bad. Not too bad. It's not great, though. I don't like that they're going in the same direction. So that's an easy fix. I'm just going to select the path. So we'll drill down here in line 1 under contents, under group 1, under path. And then we can just hit this button to the right here, which will reverse the path direction. So let me deselect everything and play that again. Ah, yes, much better. And I think both of these shapes here have points. Yeah, they're kind of a squished hexagon. At least that one is. Let's look at this one. What do we have here? Yes, this is a hexagon, but a more different hexagon. And where the trim paths kind of start and finish, we can control. One way to control that is to grab the pen tool. I'll just control click in here to deselect all of the points and then just click on the point that I want to modify. I'll right click on that point and then go down to mask and shape path and choose set first vertex, which basically means that this point here, this vertex, is going to be the first one in the group. And so that's the one, if we unsolo the other layer, that's the one where the animation is going to start from. Okay, why can't I see that? Oh, I see. The line is so small that I actually couldn't see it. So there it is. You can see that now the animation is starting from that point. It's hard to see because the stroke is so small there, but if I deselect, you can see that that is happening indeed. Now, the other shape layer here does not have a point right down at the bottom. So if we wanted it to start there, we could add a point and then right click, go to mask and shape and set first vertex. And now if we solo up all of these and play it, we're going to get kind of a mirrored sort of animation, which is nice. That works. The other thing that you can do, I'll delete this vertex here, and then let's see where, I'm just going to bump the stroke up because I can't tell where it's. Okay, so right now this is the first vertex. The other thing that you can do with trim paths is you can just change the offset. So if you just click and rotate the offset, we can just move this around. And right now you can't really see it. So what we could do is just jack up the height of our comp so we can see everything to find out exactly where you want that to start. There we go. Something like that. That's another way that you could go about doing essentially the same thing. So let me set this back to 4. I'll deselect everything and let's just play that. Oh, there we go. Let me just solo these 3 layers. Now, maybe we don't want these to go in opposing directions because now that I see it, I don't really like it. I think what I would like is them to go in the same direction, but to start at the top and the bottom like they are now. So I just changed this back to reverse path direction off. And I think I like that better. Yes, I think that's fine. You can do kind of whatever you want. So I'm just going to play this back. We'll get a look at it. I think the final thing that I'd like to do is to give this some dimensionality. And we're going to kind of fake a 3D sort of look here. And the way that we do that is to essentially move things in the comp in a quasi 3D way to get some parallax effect. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take line 2, I'm going to parent that to line 1, then I'm going to shy line 2 because I don't really need to see it. I'm going to adjust the scale of line 1. I'm just going to do a keyframe animation here. I'm going to set a keyframe at 0, and then we'll adjust some things. I'm going to take the text layer, and I'm also going to set a keyframe here. And then maybe the leaf layers here. What I might do is jump back up into the project panel, grab another null, drop it in the center, set that to an adjustment layer, and I'll call it Leaf Master Controller, and I will parent all the other leaf controllers to it. And then I can set a scale keyframe on this. And so what I want to do is over time, and I might make this animation something like 10 seconds long. So I'm just going to hit N on the keyboard, and that will put the endpoint for the work area right at 10 seconds. And then I just right clicked and chose to trim comp to work area. So I might go to maybe this point right here and just scale these leaves up a tiny bit, maybe by like, I don't know, 1.5%. It's going to be pretty imperceivable. And then I'm going to move the other layers here a bit more. Actually, maybe we'll move those up something like maybe 103 or something like that. Maybe a little bit more, because they are actually above the lines in the stacking order. And then for the lines, I'm going to maybe make those a little bit less, maybe 101.5. And so it's going to be very subtle. I'm not even sure you can tell that they are moving. Maybe I'll make those like, I don't know, 105, something like that. And then maybe 109-ish. Let's see how that looks. Yes, I think that is looking quite nice. And then finally, I'm going to take the text and I'm going to make this move the most of all. So actually, I'm going to start with the text at perhaps 95, and then I'm going to go up to maybe 110. Let's try that. The text may look a little bit fuzzy. What we could do is collapse the layer transformation here, or continuously rasterize, and then jump in this comp here and then collapse that. And then also we'll continuously rasterize this. So everything's basically continuously rasterized, or the layers are all collapsed. So now it will remain essentially sharp no matter how big you make it. And that's too big. So don't do that. So let's check this out now. Essentially, I want to make the text look like it's in front. So I want to have that scale the most out of all three of these, which is why I made a scale change of 15, where my Leaf Master Controller is doing about 10-ish, so that's a little bit less, and then the lines are going 5. So it's a difference of like 5, and then another 5, and then another 5, which isn't drastic, but I think it's enough over the course of this animation to give it a 3D sort of effect. It's giving it a parallax effect, and we can kind of boost that even more by making this 90 when it starts. And that'll really make it look like it's in front of everything else, because things that are closer to you or a camera appear to be moving faster than things that are further away. That's kind of what the parallax effect is. So you can kind of cheat that by taking a layer that you want to appear as though it is in front in 3D space or closer to the viewer, and scaling that up more over time. It's kind of hard to see over maybe 10 seconds. If I just squish this down, you'll see it perhaps a little bit more. I think we could sell this even more by just scaling down the back, these lines even less. We can just do like 103 or something like that. It'll be very, very subtle. But if we get those to move almost imperceivably, everything else I think is going to fall into place a little bit more. Yeah, that's looking quite nice, I think. Yes, very good. So that about wraps it up for this series of lessons, checking out this Boutque style animation with this great looking text that you can find over on Envato Elements. Here's the font that was used, and all of the other assets you can find over on Envato Elements as well. Make sure to watch the next lesson where you're going to learn some final tips and tricks. In this course, you learned about several key concepts for animating in After Effects, using keyframes and modifying the interpolation, expressions for wiggle, inertial bounce, and looping, masks, shapes, motion blur, 2.5D with the After Effects camera, and more. I hope that you were able to follow along, because that is really the best way to learn. A few times in the course, I used third-party tools and effects, and I just want to mention again that none of these are required, but they sure are useful. The point of showing them to you, again, is to open you up to the idea that there are really useful tools out there for specific jobs that'll help you with annoying or tedious tasks in After Effects. Some of the tools are free and some of them cost a bit of money. But here's the thing. Your time is the most valuable resource that you have. So if there's a tool out there that can help you to shave off a few hours over the course of a week or two, it very well may be worth it. And like I mentioned before, there are many scripts and plugins that you can get for free. For example, Video Copilot's FX Console is free, and you should absolutely be using it. In fact, Video Copilot has several free effects, and you should get them all. All of the assets in this course came from Envato Elements. You can get unlimited downloads of video templates, stock video, audio tracks, and effects with Envato Elements. Millions of creative digital assets with simple commercial licensing, and you can cancel at any time. Not only is Envato Elements a great place for assets, you can also get inspiration for learning After Effects by looking at the After Effects templates and seeing how they're put together. You can download them, open them up, poke around at the layers, look at the keyframes, and find out how a particular look or animation actually works. Thanks so much for watching this course. I hope you were able to follow along and learn some new techniques and ideas that you can use in your After Effects animations. I'm Dave Boutque for Envato, and I'll see you around.